Alaska is the perfect place to go if you want to get away from the rest of the world. As America's least densely populated state, you have plenty of breathing room for any kind of authority or prying eyes that may want to know what you're up to. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled across Scientology centers at the end of a dirtback road, with nothing else for miles around. Heard stories from doomsday preppers who claim to have bunkers made out of shipping containers in the sides of mountains, and met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior that wanted to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. All of this and more you can find in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in a city. It takes about 30 minutes tops to drive across, so that gives you an idea for what we up north consider a big city. The only other real city in the state is Fairbanks. These two cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It's a 7-hour drive one way to get between them, through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up on either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park. Before you drive through these colossal canyons, carved out of rock over tens of thousands of years by melting glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast, flat interior plain with mountains in the distance. I say all of this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in Alaska, even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there is nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 people on a good day. 10 years back, it was even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the great outdoors that women in the lower 48 don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school, things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid woman who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned built tough attitude that I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip into the mountains up past Talkeetna. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of the year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer here has a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it's like. It gets to about dusk and that's it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night through. Shout out to the readers in the far north of Scandinavia and Greenland. The false sense of security I had thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety probably nearly got me killed, or worse. My second mistake was not telling anyone where I was going. I just packed up for my trip, stopped at Subway for a lunch and headed out to the great beyond. The drive was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the road on both sides, with the occasional empty space where there had been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you are still connected to civilization in some way. This leads me to my biggest mistake, not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job and I didn't want to pay the $15 overnight camp fee, and was way too scared to risk the fine, so I found a spot that looked good and I pulled off the road. The map that I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up near a mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head to for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town or something. I pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray, grabbed my map and compass and started off into the woods. Now this hadn't been the first time that I had done this. I'd been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own, with my dad through my childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumb blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was. Or so I thought. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. There was nothing there. Just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it and nothing else. I was very disappointed but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp off in the woods and I set to building a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Here in Alaska, you're supposed to set up cooking a ways off from your camp, just in case bears are nosy. The last thing you want is a 1,300-pound grizzly bear poking his nose in your tent, wondering why you smell like Campbell's soup and s'mores. By this time, it was getting late, about 10 p.m. but the sun was still high in the sky, and by the time dinner was over, it was nearly 11. I was starving and I dug in. About an hour later, it was about as dark as it was going to get, so I hunkered down in my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke to voices in the distance, and slow-moving crashes through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few on some campouts, so it wasn't too uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident, and I closed my eyes again. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightish forest. "Who the heck is camping on our property?" I froze. I knew I had messed up and I was getting up, grabbing my purse and putting on my shoes so I could go do apologies before I heard the man again. "When we find you, you're dead. You're on private militia property and trespassers get shot." And that's when the whole situation changed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just pack up my tent with some armed guy lurking around. I carefully put my shoes on, put my keys in my purse and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away, wait until they got bored and left, and then go back, pack up, and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely in earshot before I heard a second voice calling for the others. They had found my tent and they were tearing it apart, going through my stuff. I heard one shout out, "The bed's still warm, and the trespasser's a chick. She left her underwear." The first man shouted out, "Okay, fan out and find her. She thinks she can trespass, then there's gonna be hell to pay." At that point, I wasn't concerned that I left my spare change of underwear in my bag, or that these creeps had found out. I needed to get out of there. Quietly, I made my way down the mountain for a good 30 minutes, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on twigs or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the men had faded quite a bit, I said forget it and booked it as fast as I could into the midnight sun down the hills. I tripped and fell and got scraped up more times than I would care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my horror, there was no car. I knew that I had come up or down the road from where I had been. I couldn't quite remember where I was at the time, but picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car, and the two men standing beside it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on the side of the road and watched. A while later, several more men appeared from the trail that I had taken. They dumped all of my stuff next to my car, hopped back on their ATVs, and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on the dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this a warning." I went back to start loading my stuff into my car and noticed what they had done. They had cut up or destroyed all of my gear, probably as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm grateful I didn't get shot. Ever since then, I have taken great care to camp out only in designated camping areas. To the weird Alaskan militia group, I know you weren't actually going to kill me, but nevertheless, let's not meet. My old apartment was in a very sketchy part of town, but I was comfortable living there because it was close to campus and was relatively inexpensive. I did have some very strange neighbors since we have a huge drug problem where I'm from. I live in Alaska and it's dark for 6 months out of the year, so a lot of people here suffer from seasonal depression, and we have one of the highest suicide rates in the country. I lived on the 3rd floor of this apartment complex, and it was one of those apartments where the front door opened to the outside balcony. There was this couple that lived above me. They were always fighting, but one night it was different. I could hear them throwing furniture around and yelling so loud that it sounded like they were physically fighting. I called the police because I wanted to make sure that everyone was okay. The police arrived and knocked on the door to ask them if everything was alright, and to tell them that the downstairs neighbors called to see if they were okay. I know this because I had my window open to listen, and I was upset that the officer would tell them who had called. The couple said, "Oh, yeah, everything's fine," and the police just left without doing anything. Fast forward a couple of hours and the yelling had mostly subsided. I'm working on an essay and I get a knock on the door. It was the police. The upstairs neighbors had called the police on me saying that I was being super loud and disturbing their sleep. I was working on an essay with headphones in and not making a sound. The police were mad and one of them was practically yelling at me saying, "Is this some kind of joke you guys are playing on each other? You call the cops on each other for fun." I told him no and that I was generally concerned for their well-being, and that they must have been mad that I had called the cops on them. I could hear the upstairs neighbors laughing, standing on their balcony and watching. The police told me to only call 911 for emergencies, and basically implied that I was lying. I couldn't sleep that night because I thought the neighbors had it out for me. The next morning, I heard sobbing and yelling coming from the balcony. I ran to put shoes and pants on to see what was going on. I ran out the door and looked up and saw my upstairs neighbor's legs dangling off the balcony. She was sitting on the rail of the balcony with her feet dangling off the side. 2 guys were holding her back. I grabbed my phone and called 911 a second time, telling them that my neighbor was trying to hurt herself. I stood underneath her where she could have landed, hoping she wouldn't try to jump if she had landed on another person, while the police told me to stay on the line. I was trying to talk her into not jumping. She kept saying that she wanted to go so she could be with her uncle who had passed away. I kept telling her that her uncle wouldn't want her to go that way. The 2 guys that were holding her back were not very helpful, so I basically told them to stop talking. One was her boyfriend who she was fighting with, and the other were her boyfriend's brother. They were acting like it was funny to them, and that she acts like this all the time. The police finally arrived after about 30 minutes. Luckily, I was able to talk her into not jumping. They handcuffed her and put her in the back of the police car and said that they would be taking her to get mentally evaluated. After the police left, her boyfriend told me to leave them alone and not stick my nose where it doesn't belong. I called the apartment leasing office to tell them what had happened, and they jokingly called me the community police. They had no idea what was going on, and to thank me, they gave me a $20 Wendy's gift card. I moved out of that apartment shortly after, and I've never heard from the couple again, but I hope that they find the help that they need. This was roughly a decade and some change ago. I was in 6th grade and was home alone because of Christmas break. I lived in one of the bigger towns of Alaska and lived in a middle-class neighborhood. Houses spaced pretty far with very long driveways down each, but the next-door neighbors knew us well enough to know if something didn't look right. It was about 4 p.m., I believe, and my mom was off work early but stopped to get groceries. Kind of a gift itself to not go shopping. I hadn't grown out of my back problems yet, and couldn't stand walking around for over an hour. Anyways, I'm in my room watching a movie with Jackie Chan, Around the World in 80 Days, when I hear knocking on the door. I didn't answer, thinking whoever it was would just be asking for my mom or dad about solar panels or something. But then I hear it slowly getting louder and louder, and around the 3rd time it got louder, I started to get scared. I was always told to call the cops if people would act as suspicious as them, and to call the cops right away. But I guess I was just too terrified at the moment, being in pajamas and enjoying my favorite movie at the time. So not knowing what to do while two guys are literally banging on the door, I call my mom. I tell her what's going on and she probably says it's just somebody trying to sell us something. I told her how it kept getting louder and I thought that they might break the door. It was a pretty thick door, but it had stained glass right about at chest height. She says to just calm down until she starts to hear it through the phone. This only took place within about a minute, but every 10 seconds or so, it would grow louder, and she started to freak out. She told me to stay right in my room with the door locked, and not to make a sound while she called the cops. So we hang up, and while I wait for my dad to answer my call, I'm looking around for anything in my room. I grabbed a t-ball bat and sat on my bed freaking out. I didn't have a window facing the front of the house, just the side. Finally my dad answers and I tell him what's going on, and that Mom was calling the cops right now. He wasn't legally allowed to be on the property, but he's very protective. My parents are divorced. He lived very close to the police station at the time, and he raced over to me. While I'm waiting for the police or my mom, I decided to peek my head out. The way the house was set up, I could stalk out of my bedroom door and see the backyard. And without walking more than 2 steps, able to peek around the corner and see through the living room bay window. I saw that they had reversed their car right up almost to our garage door, and I could partially see through the door 2 men pounding away at it. I stayed there and saw the first guy send the other around back, and saw his face as he went to walk around the house. I hid before he could see me and I waited. I realized after what they were doing, the one around back tried to open our glass sliding doors on the balcony. Thankfully, not only was it locked, but also a piece of wood was in the rubber so that if they overpowered the lock, it wouldn't open more than an inch. He started to try to break it as well, and then my mom called me back, crying and wanting to know if I was okay. She had pulled over at the store's gas station and said that the police would be there ASAP, and she was on her way home too right now. After about a minute of them both trying through the front and back, they regrouped back near front door and I was really tired of them making me feel scared. So I walked out of my room to the front door, yelling at them in a tank top and shorts holding a bat. They didn't hear me until I was right at the door and I spooked them. They ran to the car to drive away, and only when they got in the car did I open the door to keep yelling at them. I forgot what I was yelling, but it drove them off. My mom got home a couple of minutes after and held me until my dad came, and I went out to his truck and showed him that I was okay, and I told him how I scared them off. He hugged me and gave me a big kiss, leaving before him and my mom could fight over him being there. Thankfully, she didn't care at all this time, and she kept me talking about the men until the cops came over about an hour later. He didn't seem too interested in talking to me until I told him that I could easily tell him the face of the guy at the front door, and a little bit of the other guy as well. He said that he suspected that they were a group that had been breaking in the past 2 weeks, stealing Christmas presents and other stuff, but this is what linked them together. They were found a couple of weeks later, and they had linked them to over 10 other burglaries. The same night they tried to break in, I had my best friend come over, and we sat up all night with my bat and one that he had brought from home. Thankfully, those guys have been caught and they're now in prison. But if for whatever reason they do get back out, let's not meet again. So, how my friend group works is we have our little circle of people who we hang around with most often. But for big events or bonfires or something similar, we expand and a couple different friend groups join in. Ben is a part of one of these extended friend groups. He is someone who always posts different and interesting things, who always has something to say. I've gotten along really well with Ben at these events, and we always end up chatting. I've always found him to be a different and unique individual. Ben started going to my local college this year. He shot me a Snapchat basically saying, "Hey, all my friends went away to different schools, and the only person that I have to talk to from the area is my now ex-girlfriend. I was wondering if you wanted to get a group together and hang out, because I would like to have some new friends around." It was actually a really nice message, because with the course I'm in, I don't get to make many friends, and all my close friends are spread out too. So I said yes. The hangout was initially supposed to be one of my friends, him and one of his friends. It was the day after class and I just got home. He told me he was going to take a quick nap before we would all head out. When he wakes up, he tells me that it's now too late and he has other plans that he forgot about. That's totally fine and I wasn't upset about it. I cancel with my friend too, so I can just sit down and do some homework. He texted me a few hours later. I didn't give him my number, but he found it, I guess, telling me his other plans got canceled, and he was now available again and wondering if I wanted to do something. I said that my friend was now out of the city, and he said that he had texted his friend, but they didn't answer. He decided to pick me up and go for a drive, and just chat. Normal enough. Ben gets to my house at around 10 p.m. I go and hop into his car and he just speeds off. Oddly enough, he's talking in an accented voice, kind of like Jamaican or something similar. I thought he was just being goofy, so I played along. Sometimes I would answer back in the accent, but then I started to think that it was weird that he wasn't talking in his own voice at all. He was driving like a maniac down the street, telling me how he was drinking earlier because he thought he was going to a party. I asked him if he was drinking and driving. He said, no, he only had a few sips. I know I probably should have gotten out of the car right then, but at this point, we're flying down the highway and I'm scared. He begins to rant about his ex and telling me that there was infidelity and trust issues on his end, and he couldn't tell me what they were because he didn't want me to think badly of him. He told me that he was still going to marry this girl and have her children. He ranted about her and got on tangents and started to scream and yell. I started to think maybe he was on some drug or something. We arrive at my college, a half-hour to 40-minute drive away in another city, and he says that we should get out of the car. I'm already scared and my phone is dying, so I just listen to what he says. At this point, I'm literally thinking that he might kill me. He took me for a walk through the light woods and then started to make sounds like a creature. He would make dinosaur sounds, or sounds like The Grudge. He would also walk like a creature, morphing his body into weird, creepy movements. I requested for us to go home because I was literally terrified. We get back into the car and start our drive home. He pulls out a pipe and he smokes something. I told him that he shouldn't do that, but he doesn't listen. Now he begins to yell. He starts back on his tangents about life again. He pulls over the car to get out and does some jumping kicks. Like what? At this point, my phone is dead. He gets back in the car and puts on his favorite song. The song begins slow and then picks up a little later. It's like a 4-minute song. He begins to scream along to all the lyrics, and smash the windows and dashboard and wheel with his hands, stomping his feet. I've seen someone passionate about a song before, but not like this. Ben swerves all around the road until we get to my house. He then turns to me and says without an accent, "I know it's late, but did you want to have sex?" in the most casual tone in the world. I gave a nervous laugh and said, "Actually, I'm good." He turned to the back seat to get something, but I got out of the car and I booked it to my house. I locked the door to my house and the bedroom door in my room as if he would break in. It might not sound as terrifying as it was for me in the moment, but at the time, I was shaking out of pure fear. I don't know if he was just on some crazy drug or if he had a split personality or something, but I've never met a person before who I've looked at and thought to myself, You're gonna kill someone someday. I really hope he doesn't see this because I actually see him at school frequently. So yeah, it's a fun life. Okay, so this happened about 4 years ago when I was 16. I was super vain and worried about my appearance. I would always want to look so pretty, so I would go all out when I took our pictures. Curled hair, fake lashes, the whole 9 yards. But I've since had kids and have a man who tells me that I'm beautiful when I look like a hobo. I never bother with makeup or anything anymore, really. Anyways, I had my Snapchat account set to public, so anyone could watch my stories or snap me. I always figured, well, if someone is weird or whatever, I can just block them. Yeah, right. Well, one day, I'm out to lunch with my mom when this random dude messages me. Says that I'm pretty and this and that, being super nice. But I don't really care to talk to him, so I'm just giving one-word replies, hoping that he'll get the hint because I hate being rude. And then he asks me to send him some revealing pictures. Absolutely not, and I tell him so. Well, he didn't like that. He said that I was horrible and that he hated women because they were all just like me. And I'm just mad because nobody likes me. Okay. I told him that he was a psycho and I laughed at him. And he threatened to sue me for defamation. LMAO, right? So I thought that was the end of it. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I blocked the dude and I go about my day. When someone adds me on Snapchat, I look at the user info and their snap score is 0 and their username was something really weird. They don't snap me or anything, but continue to watch my stories every single day. Fast forward a few months and this person snaps me. I was doing the same one-word replies cause I didn't really feel like talking. You would think I would have learned the first time, but nope. He starts with the nice small talk whatever, and then out of nowhere sends me a couple of different selfies of myself that were posted in my story months ago. He asks me if I can print them out for him. He gives me these sizes he wants them in, and says that he'll give me his address. Hold up, what? I immediately shut it down. And then this dude sends me a couple pictures of myself, framed in his house on his wall. Heck no. I told him off really good and I blocked him. And then another account adds me, another weird username. I remove it and I change my account settings. He still has my username, so he adds me from a million different accounts which I won't add back. They were all super weird usernames. I won't give the actual usernames, but on Snapchat you can choose a display name. And all of these were pretty similar to the usernames. One was, I'm wet. One was, just add me back. One said, I'm a tortoise. And Snapchat also tells you how the person added you via phone number, user search, quick add, etc. They all said user search, though I know we searched it up. And every account had a snap score of 0. So obviously, they had just made the account. I know it was him. Whoever this weirdo was who keeps adding me on Snapchat because I won't send him pictures. Let's not meet. So, let me start out. I'm a very nice person and I'll befriend most people if they're nice and our personalities go well together. Here's where he comes in. At my first job, I met this guy. He was nice, but I was in no way attracted to him. Yet I continued to be his friend and I made it pretty clear I'd only be friends with him. I eventually stopped hanging out with him and started ignoring him. But sometimes I fear he'll show up at my job again. I noticed very early on that he was very clingy and would rush to hang out. It was always almost immediately after asking if we would hang out, he would want to stop by. Still, I pushed it aside and said, maybe, he has no friends. However, he held grudges very strongly. Once this girl who also worked with us didn't say hi back to him and he said, forget her, she can die. He wishes bad on anyone who is rude to him. Another red flag to run. But yet I continued to be nice. Summer had ended and I was going back to college. Even though I was about an hour away, he still wanted to hang out. He was willing to drive all the way here just to hang out. I found it kind of annoying that he just wouldn't make more friends and try to push it off. Once he even texted me saying that he would hurt himself, so I called him and tried to comfort him that things will get better. During college, I had Snapchat and finally found someone who I liked and we started dating. That's when he got even more clingy and weird. He was always depressed and talking about no one wants him, and that 21 was a good age to go out. At that point, I was severely annoyed at him because he was trying to guilt me into dating him. When we hung out, he had asked, "Why not me? What's wrong with me?" Every time I chose to hang out with my boyfriend, he would text me things like, "You'll never hear from me again. I'll be gone." I ignored them because there was something not right with that guy. Summer came around again. I was still working at the same company, but a different location. I was still kind of friends with him, though I avoided hanging out with him while I was at college. He worked at the same company, but at the previous location. He wanted to transfer to my location because he hated the people there, and I'd be working at the new location. Some point during the summer, I started to ignore him because he was even more annoying and trying to guilt me into dating him. My boyfriend clearly did not like him because he thinks he's crazy, and he didn't want me near him. An example being, during the same summer, he started talking about buying skips, which he clarified to mean a gun, after I asked because he wanted to tag along with my boyfriend and I said that I wanted alone time and that he would be a third wheel. This is where things get weird. After the fallout and weeks of not texting, he came into my line at the store to buy one single item and said not a word. May I point out that there were 7 other lines open, and he works at the same company but a different location. While working, every now and again, I would look around and see him walking out of the near cashier line. Every time I saw him, I was in the corner register, so thankfully he didn't and couldn't see me. I saw him there on 3 different occasions. I often think about if he has been in the store more than I have seen him. College started again, and I went to live on campus. I would get text messages from him every now and again saying, "Hi, hey, or hey, how are you?" And then he started messaging me on Snapchat to say, "Let's talk about this like adults." I finally replied because at this point, he wouldn't leave me alone. I told him I had no interest in being his friend because he was toxic and needed to make new friends. He finally gave up. However, winter break has come and I have to decide if I want to work during the break or not. He often talked about getting his gun license. My one fear is that he'll show up when I'm at work. However, I don't feel so safe at home either. I forgot to mention, he lives about 5 minutes away from me. That was another red flag that sprung in my head during our friendship. He was looking to move out of his parents' house. I just find it eerily creepy that he chose the town that I was in, and only minutes away. I have a feeling he'll be lurking through the store. When I go home, I think about if he's sitting in his car in the street next to my house. And one thing I forgot to mention, he never bought me a gift, but he frequently asked if he could buy me a teddy bear. He even made an account on a streaming site. Sometimes I say maybe I'm overreacting. I guess all I can say is wish me luck, and I hope he finds someone else to obsess over. Update. 5 days later after I said, "No, I don't want to be friends," before I made this original post, he messaged me again. I think it's time to call the police. This time it said something along the lines of, "We really need to talk about being friends. Answer this when you're ready." He's clinging so strong. A couple of days later, he's trying to bait me into talking to him by wishing me Merry Christmas. So, maybe, let's not meet again. This first started when I went to summer camp in my junior year of high school and I met this girl. Her name is Mar. I introduced myself to Mar and then for the rest of the 6 weeks, I probably talked to her a total of 3 times, which includes my introduction, the time that she locked me and my friend into a room, and when I said goodbye when the camp ended. She seemed really nice and I thought she was extremely sweet. Fast forward a year. I get a text out of nowhere saying, "Hey, I missed you. It's me, Mar." We continue to text, catching up on our lives. At the time, I thought this was normal as I usually get texts from people from that camp trying to catch up, and it was really nice hearing where they were in life. About 9 texts in after catching up on our lives, she suddenly asked, "Will you go to prom with me?" I dismissed it as strange because I thought she was probably desperate to get a date from prom, and me being about a 1-hour drive away was a good distance. She lets me know the date of her prom, which I realize is the day after my prom, and the day before one of my concerts of an orchestra I was in at the time. I let her know my situation, but she continues to try to convince me to go. Every day after, she continues to text me multiple times asking if I could go, saying that I had time to go and that I should do it for her. I said yes in the end. I felt like she really wanted to date to prom for the experience, and I thought, why not? I would want the same if I were in her situation. What could go wrong? 3 days later, I'm playing some games on my PC at the time, when I hear my older sister yell the weirdest thing from downstairs. "Your girl is here." Confused, I go to the window of my room and what do you know? Mar is standing right in my driveway, smiling and waving at me. Sure, most people think, oh my god, how did she find my address? How did she know that I'm free and what the heck? My dumbass instantly thought, oh crap, she drove an hour here. I feel kinda bad. I head outside to meet her to ask her why she was here, and the first thing she said was, "I drove an hour here, so you should take me on a date." Behind me is my dad, approvingly shaking his head, and before I can say anything, he tells me to go. The man had such a proud look on his face, and that's when I started to realize maybe this situation was getting kinda bad. Maybe. I take her out to a Chinese restaurant and decide to order 3 plates of food all for myself. I realize that maybe if I kept eating, I could decrease the time I had to talk as I'm chewing 75% of the time. To start off, she tells stories about all the guys that she's ever went after were taken by people that she knew. She got increasingly mad as she kept talking to the point where people started to look. Suddenly, she asked me about my relationship with this girl that I had a thing with a few months back. In my head again, I think this is fine. She probably knows about that because she's friends with her friends, and they probably told her. I explained my situation about how I don't talk to the girl anymore, and Mars suddenly gets a flare in her eye. She asked me about what I plan to do from the time to college and if I'm interested in dating. I tell her I don't plan on doing anything until college. After a few more places we go to because she said she wouldn't leave until she was satisfied with her time here, we go back home and we decide to play games on my Wii. After a solid game of Super Smash Brawl, she realizes that I'm not having fun and says, "I guess you're kicking me out," and then proceeds to try to kiss me. Out of panic, I put my entire right hand on her face, pushing her away, basically slapping her and giving her a facepalm. I lead her out of my house and to her car, and when she gets in, she starts to take pictures of me on her Snapchat story with the caption, "First date." I tell my parents about my situation, and I swear to God, they literally brush it away saying that, "Oh, people can be like that. You should be happy a girl likes you." My sister slowly figures out that maybe this isn't good, but agrees with my parents because she thought that it would be funny to see how this went. 2 weeks later, dodging her text of her asking to come over again, I'm heading to her pre-prom party. I'm completely exhausted to the point where I could not run, and I was just not ready for another prom. Surprisingly, the pre-prom party and the prom was a lot of fun. Mar didn't do anything to make me feel uncomfortable, and her friends were amazingly funny. After the prom, she takes me back to her friend's house. She then asked if I could stay the night, which I say I can due to my concert that I have the day after. And then she proceeds to get very angry and tries to push for it. And so I text my sister, "Help." And for the very first time, she comes to my rescue. An hour later, as Mara is getting increasingly madder, I get a call from my sister saying that she's outside. I let Mara know when I leave, so relieved that my day of prom with her was over. A few months later, I get an anonymous letter in the mail addressed to me. Inside were 3 pages, filled front and back with a declaration of love from Mar. It explains that she fell in love with me at first sight, how everything I did made her love me even more, how she couldn't be without me. I meet up with a friend a few days later, and he shows me his Snapchat conversations with her. It's just a wall of text, a wall of questions, asking personal questions about me. For the next year while I was in college, I would get random texts and Snapchats from her showing pictures of her coming to my town asking where I was. There were times where she would go to my town's high school games and send me pictures of our coaches with their jackets and the name of my town on there. Eventually, she stopped messaging me because I had blocked her on everything. So yeah, let's not meet ever again. My cousin recently reminded me of a memory I had suppressed because it was one of the most terrifying moments of my childhood. I'm from Texas, so we hardly ever get snow days, so when we did, I always tried to take advantage. When I was in 6th grade, my school was shut down for 2 snow days. This never happened. It was a miracle. On one of the days, my cousin came over and we decided to walk to my old elementary school to go play at the park. It was about 4 blocks away from my house. I lived in the neighborhood for years, so I knew someone on almost every block. This is important for later. I always felt safe and I knew the neighborhood, so walking to the park with my cousin was no big deal. We got to the park and surprisingly, we were the only 2 people there. We were having a blast. We moved from the playground to the field behind the playground. To kind of explain the layout, we entered the playground from the back parking lot, so we had to walk through the parking lot to the field next to it to get to the playground. There was a dumpster in the parking lot that was against a brick wall. There was a space between the wall and the dumpster that a lot of teenagers used to hang out behind. On the other side of the wall was the playground, and a few yards to the left of the dumpster was a large field. So, we're enjoying our time when this truck pulled up. There were 2 men in it. I got a really bad feeling. I told my cousin that we should probably head home. My cousin insisted that it was nothing, so I shook it off and I kept playing in the snow. The men got out of the truck and went behind the dumpster. My cousin reassured me that it was not a big deal because, like I said, a lot of people went back there. And that's when they started yelling, saying things like, "Woo, this is gonna be fun." Even at age 11, I was paranoid. "Come on, let's go home, please," she said. "They're not even talking to us, just ignore them." I was in 7th grade, so I listened to her. Until we heard them scream, "What are you girls doing here all alone? Where are your parents? You're here all by yourself." Chills ran down my spine. I was so scared. My cousin and I looked at each other and automatically started walking really fast through the field to head home. The men came out from behind the dumpster and started yelling, "Where are you girls going? We just want to talk to y'all." We were terrified. Our fast walk turned into a sprint. We got to the sidewalk and that's when we heard the truck door slam. My heart sank and I started crying. They peeled out of the parking lot. All I could think is we were about to get taken. The truck was making its way towards us. Knowing someone on almost every block ended up saving mine and my cousin's life. I had a friend that lived across the street from the school. All we had to do was cut across this small neighborhood intersection and we would be there. The truck caught up to us as soon as we had crossed the intersection. They slowed down and the man on the passenger side rolled his window down. "Why are you girls running? We just want to have some fun with y'all." The truck came to a stop, but we had made it. We ran up to the door and started yelling for help and ringing the doorbell. The truck sped off. We were safe, and we told my friend and her parents what had happened, and my mom came and picked us up. We were so scared we couldn't even remember any details about the truck or the men. All I knew was I would never go to that park alone again. If I didn't think to run to my friend's house, I don't know if I would be here. If the men had caught up to us before crossing the intersection, I don't even want to imagine what would have happened. I don't know what the two men were planning on doing to us, but I know that it wasn't good. So, to the two men that ruined my snow day and scared me shitless, let's not meet. One day when I was about 14 years old, I'm 22 now, I was home alone during the summer watching my two younger sisters. At the time, they were 8 and 5, while my parents were at work. Now usually this was a normal thing for me. It was all routine. My parents would leave money, about $20, just enough for pizza if we were hungry. They would come back from work around 5 or 6. This particular day didn't sit well with me because, for one, I was feeling really sick, and two, I absolutely hated the rain. The rain was terrible this day, and this was still a time where my sisters were still scared of thunder and lightning. It was really gloomy outside, and I would like to think the creepy part of my day started around noon from what I remember. I was in my dad's room when I heard a loud knock on the front door. Now, we have a TV in the room over where my sister was watching her favorite show at the time. Rugrats. It's completely irrelevant, but I like the show too. Now, something didn't feel right other than me being so sick and not being able to keep anything down. I quickly popped up off the couch and peeked outside through the window in my dad's room, which looked straight onto the driveway. I look in, I see this green truck parked in my driveway, and I quickly thought, nobody in my family has a green truck, and why would somebody be visiting in this horrible weather? So, quickly and quietly, I make my way to my sister's room, and tell her to help me make sure all the windows are locked in the house. While I was in school, I didn't believe in spare keys, so I would hop through all the windows of my home to get in. Now she's pretty freaked out because she had no idea what was going on. After locking all the windows of the house, I told her to grab my youngest sister and wait in the bathroom, and lock the door and to not come out until she heard my voice telling her to do so. I looked out the peephole and I see two men standing at the front door. What looks like they're trying to pick the lock or whatever, but I didn't know what they were doing. I was just freaking out. At this point, I'd already turned everything off to keep from making any noise. I walked quietly to the house phone, and a rookie mistake on my part, called my mother and told her my situation. She had told me to call the police, and that this should have been my first move, and that she would be on her way and would be calling my father. As soon as I hung up, I called the police and told them my situation, and they told me that help would be on the way. By this time, I heard a slam like a door of the car being shut. I look outside and I see the two men had vanished. I guess unsuccessful in their attempt to break into my home, they left upset. The police showed up about the same time my parents did, a few short moments later, and I told them what had happened. The police told me that next time to call them first in a situation like this one, and to thank God nobody got hurt. Honestly, I was only worried about my sisters because if the two men did get in, I wouldn't have been able to take on both of them. After that day, we went on like normal, except we went to my grandma's from there on out. I never saw those two men again, and I hope that we never meet. I am and have always been a very small girl, standing at 4'11", full grown now at 27. And I've always been able to pass as being much younger than I am, especially if I'm not wearing any makeup. When I was a small child, about 7 or 8, my father bought a little cabin in a town in Texas called Livingston, in an area of Livingston called Alaska. I specify because of the second part of the story. Anyone with kids needs to be wary of the area. The cabin was really nothing remarkable at only 600 square feet. It was really just one giant room, a teeny kitchen the size of a normal bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a large closet, and a porch out front. The whole property consisted of 2 lots, so there was plenty of space, but the cabin itself was dinky. This whole area was in a strange mix between backwoods and suburbia. It was a true neighborhood, but not the prim and neatly kept neighborhoods I was used to in suburbia Houston. Despite this, it became a very fun place for me, and some of my greatest memories in life are at that cabin, including my evacuation story from Houston during Hurricane Rita. That is a story for another day. Anyways, around 11 to 12 years old, my father bought me a 4-wheeler, and the little lake town suddenly became a lot bigger. I didn't go super far, but I definitely ended up going further than I had ever gone before. And it was quite common to see me zipping up and down the roads with a pile of neighborhood kids on the back of the 4-wheeler when we would go up to the lake house on weekend visits. This was around 2001 to 2002, so cell phones were a thing, but it was still common for people not to have them. Usually I had a beeper that I carried around, but with no phones at the lake house, my father gave me a walkie-talkie with a very long reach instead. Looking back on it now from a world of cell phones, this seemed like a bad idea. This was a small town and we had spent so much time here that it felt safe. So one of these weekends, I was buzzing around my neighborhood like I usually did, and I stopped at this peninsula that overlooked the lake. This was a set of docks that us kids always came to when we wanted to swim, despite the very real threat of giant alligators. But being stupid kids, we really didn't worry about that. And I was overlooking the lake when my walkie-talkie buzzed to life. Naturally thinking it was my parents trying to reach me, I answered quickly. I couldn't quite make out what they said at first, so I tried confirming that it was my dad. At this point in the neighborhood was a little ways away from the cabin, but I had reached my parents from this point before, so despite the fact I could not quite recognize the voice, I assumed it was my dad. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was off enough that I remember being slightly annoyed. Garbled questions that I had answered, but no answers that would have hinted at who I was or where I was. Eventually, the conversation started to drift in a way that I knew something was off, but I was not alarmed just yet, as my dad was notorious for pulling pranks on me and goofing around. I kept talking stupidly. Alarm bells weren't going off yet. Finally though, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie makes a comment. I cannot for the life of me remember what he said exactly, but it was enough to make me doubt that it was my father. This is when things took an extremely creepy turn. Bear in mind, I'd been talking to this guy pretending to be my father for a good 15 minutes, sitting on my 4-wheeler on this peninsula. I can see you. You should come take a ride in my boat, he said. My father had a boat, but this was so out of character that it made me realize that it wasn't my father. Dad, you're not Dad, are you? What are you talking about? He said. If you can see me. I started feeling a bit peeved that this guy had been messing with me. What am I wearing? He paused for a second before the walkie crackled to life, and he said very clearly, You're wearing an orange shirt. You have red hair and you're sitting on a red 4-wheeler right by the swim docks. Why don't you come for a ride on my boat? At this point, my eyes widened and my blood ran cold. This entire time, some strange guy that I didn't know had been watching me from God knows where. It took me maybe 10 seconds to look around wildly and then kick the 4-wheeler up and race out of there so fast that the wheels had a hard time catching the ground. I remember the wheels spun out against the gravel beneath them, and when the 4-wheeler finally started moving, little me had a hard time holding on. I floored it the entire way home, stopped in the middle of the yard and burst into the house. Obviously, the first thing I did was ask my parents if they had contacted me, which they had not and hadn't for hours. I was in such a panic that there was no way my dad wouldn't have convinced had it been him. He was a practical joker, but he knew when the fun was over. I hate to think what might have happened had I continued sticking around the area, or if I hadn't figured out that it wasn't my dad pulling my leg. Nothing came of this incident though, and my childhood up there resumed as normal. Eventually, the weekend visit stopped, but the story doesn't end there. During my parents' divorce, I moved to live at the lake house permanently with my father, or at least until we could find something better. This was the only place that we could go when he left my mother, which is a long story in and of itself, but I won't get into that. My father had recently suffered from health issues, so I took a job at a nearby gas station, tobacco barn, to pay the bills and let him recuperate. Thankfully, the lake house had no bills save for electricity, water, and internet, so my small salary was enough to keep us going. I only worked there for 3 months, but those 3 months were by far the creepiest that I'd ever experienced. Within the first month, a rather tall and obese man became infatuated with me, and he couldn't have been creepier. He had short crew-cut hair and a slightly unkept beard and mustache combo. The first time that we ran into each other, he stared at me with these wide, crazy eyes, got his gas, and just stood there for 2 or 3 solid minutes, just staring. When I asked him if I could help him, he said nothing. Now, the part of the tobacco barn I worked in was strictly the gas side, and I was pretty much in a glass box with an opening to take people's money and give them their cigarettes, which I could not have been more thankful for. Several times this man came to visit, and he would leave to pump gas after staring at me awkwardly. About the 4th or 5th time, after I thought that he had left, I heard a knock on the other side of the barn on the glass. And there he was, face pressed against the glass, staring at me with this wide, manic grin, and waving at me with his fingers. It was enough to send me running for my manager when he left, demanding to go on break before I peed myself. The last time that I saw him, I will never forget though. It has been etched into my mind so deeply that I doubt bleach could scrub it away. He arrives as he usually did and orders his gas. This time, however, he reached through the hole in the glass and grabbed my hand before I could put the cash away in the cash register. It wasn't a violent grab, but it was firm enough to keep me from pulling away. Being a very sheltered 18-year-old, I froze in place. "I love you," he said, refusing to let go of my hand. I simply stared at him, unnerved and alarm bells ringing in my head. "Say it." "What?" I responded. "Say you love me." Naturally, I just wanted this guy to go away. And being so freaking scared out of my mind at this point of him, I stammered and I said it out of impulse. Maybe he would let me go and go away. "I love you," I said uneasily. "Call me if you need anything." "What's my number?" he asked again. This threw me off completely, and the look on my face probably gave away my confusion, because he repeated himself, despite my stammering that I did not know. Finally, he said something that made my blood run cold. I felt like I was going to throw up. "It's 911. He winked. This guy was the sheriff deputy, the person that I would have to call if I got into any sort of trouble in town. The person that I would have to call if I had a medical emergency, or if someone tried to rob me. And he wouldn't let go of my hand. I just nodded, trying to keep myself from shaking bad enough for him to feel it. He had never pulled up in a police car or anything, but when I talked to my manager, she confirmed what he said as being true. Once he did let go of me and went on his way, I retreated to the back and demanded to be relieved from the gas station area. I didn't care. I did not want to see that guy ever again. Thankfully, we moved soon after, so I never had to. But I will never forget the leering grin that man gave me every single time he purchased gasoline. You would think moving away would be the end of the story, but no. It got even worse when I went to college, and you wouldn't think that would be the case considering I was in Galveston. I needed to go to my counselor to discuss a few things, and this usually involved about 30 minutes of chit-chat, as me and my counselor had become close while I was attending school. During one of these chats, which my father had attended due to him attending school in the same classes as, it was in an effort to finally get his degree, I mentioned Onalaska, Texas, and how we had owned a lake house up there. Initially, the happy expression left my counselor's face. She informed me that she had been a social worker in that area for quite a few years. And suddenly my childhood playground took an extremely dark turn, and the sheriff at the gas station became a nightmare. Apparently that area was notorious for kidnappings and other horrible incidents. Whole neighborhoods, including police officers, were in on it, and it was common for people trying to out the incidents to either going missing or to be completely thrown out of the community through intimidation tactics. She proceeded to tell me of several cases she had worked on, careful to leave out confidential details of course, including incidents of entire families being in on the whole mess. When I told her about the sheriff that I had encountered, she kind of paled and wouldn't tell me anymore, except that she wasn't surprised. The conversation went on for over an hour and a half, but it was enough to make me never want to return to the small town that I had called my childhood summer home, and vowed to never ever bring any children I might have in the future there. So did the guy that intercepted my walkie-talkie signal and tried to lure me onto his boat. And to the creepy sheriff. Let's never meet again. For the love of God, please. So I live in an apartment complex right next to a 7-Eleven. Literally a 2-minute walk from my door. So, since all this quarantine lockdown mess, I've been staying up later than usual till maybe 2 or 3 in the morning most nights. So last night, a little bit after 12, I had a taste for some chips and decided that I would go across the street to 7-Eleven, which I go to regularly. So I make my way over, and on my way in, I had to pass this man who was browsing on the Redbox kiosk. I don't think much of it. I go inside, get some snacks, pay, and then head out of the door. As I'm coming out, the Redbox man is literally staring dead at me with these scarily bright, light blue eyes. But not wanting to freak myself out even more, I say to myself, maybe he's zoned out or in deep thought. I wander into La La Land myself, sometimes so by thinking that. I was trying to make myself more comfortable having to walk past this strange man. So I'm headed back into my apartment complex, which on this side of the street has a creaky gate door. I realized that as I was walking, I never heard it slam behind me like I always had before. I look back and the man is right behind me, not close up on me but still, definitely following. Once again, trying to ease my mind, I'm thinking that he must be going home, but I also noticed that he didn't have any disc in his hand. For as much as he was at the kiosk the whole time I was in the store, taking my sweet, indecisive time. So not wanting to come off as scared, I keep my same pace, but I probably should have sprinted because, man, forget being nice. Anyways, I'm literally just a few steps away from my door, which is upstairs, and the man randomly calls out to me, "Hey, do you have a lighter?" Out of instinct, I turned my head to the fact I knew someone was speaking to me and responded, "No, I don't, sorry." I didn't want to go up my stairs because I didn't want to let this man know exactly which apartment that I lived in. So I was planning on walking around until I lost him. But he asked me another question. "Could I use your bathroom?" I tell him, "No, sorry, my roommates probably wouldn't be comfortable with me letting someone in this late. I don't have roommates, but I dang sure didn't want this man getting any ideas thinking that I was by myself." I keep walking, but this man was still following me. I simply ask, "Do you live around here?" And he tells me, "I have a buddy that does and he was supposed to meet me across the way there, but maybe he fell asleep or something." I've never been here before, but I do know his door is number 201. Could you help me find it? 201 is my door, plus if you had a friend that lives over here, why are you asking to use my bathroom? I knew this man was lying and up to something. I quickly came up with 201. That should be right past the pool right next to the laundry area. My friends are waiting for me, so I should get going. My gut told me to head to my car though, because what if he watched where I was going and decided to give me a surprise later on? No, I watch too many movies and read too many scary stories uploaded down here. So I started heading towards the parking lot. Not running, but definitely walking quicker than before, when I realized the man is chasing me at this point. I hurry up and pull my keys out of my pocket and get in my car and immediately lock the doors. The man starts pounding on my driver's side window telling me to open the door. I can't help but focus on those creepy blue eyes, but I also notice that he was reaching for his pocket. I start up my car before I can see what he was going to pull out. I heard a pop, but I didn't give a crap at that moment, as long as I could get the heck out of his presence. I drove maybe 5 minutes down the street to this Arco gas station and called the police. Waiting on the police to arrive, I noticed what the popping sound was. This wacko had popped my back tire with probably a switchblade. Of course, when the police arrived and went to check the area, the random guy was gone. They did question the 7-Eleven clerk, and he let them know that the man had been up there a few times since last week, and never has been a problem but is obviously homeless. I'm still shook up about what went on last night, and I'm going to chill on the late night trips to 7-Eleven for a little bit. To the messed up Redbox man, let's not meet again. But if we do, I have a taser for you on its way from Amazon. Try me. It was probably only after my close call that my mind really started to run away with what could have happened were it not for my dog. I'm a 26-year-old female. I live with my fiance and my 2 cats and my dog, Rowan. Our house is literally less than a minute away from a huge farmer's field that is frequented by many dog walkers at all times of the day. Me and my significant other often take turns walking Rowan around the field throughout the day. It was only around 7:30 p.m. and it was still really bright and sunny. Rowan was letting me know that it was time to go for a walk, so while my partner was tinkering in the garage, I grabbed his leash and headed to the field. Let me quickly tell you about Rowan. He's a 2-year-old Rottweiler who is very loving and playful, if a little daft, but he wouldn't hurt a fly. There's not a bad bone in his body. He is also extremely well trained, and we made sure to put the effort in as he's a big dog breed with a bad rep, so we wanted to make a point of not feeding stereotypes. I'm very much of the opinion of there's no bad dogs, just bad owners. Unfortunately, we've had some run-ins with some not-so-good dog owners, so Rowan gets a little nervous when he meets new dogs and people, but we're working on it. Anyway, back to the story. We're walking around the farmer's field. Rowan is off sniffing and peeing on every blade of grass in sight. I always keep an eye out for other walkers anyway due to Rowan being a little nervous, and I clocked a guy on his own walking down the path towards me fairly far away. At first, I thought nothing of it, as plenty of people walk this route without dogs. We were just kind of getting into lockdown in the UK though. As the guy got closer, I noticed he was in a full tracksuit with the hood up, which was odd because it was like 23 degrees, so shorts and t-shirt weather. He then took a small path off the field, leading through some bushes. It was a public-made shortcut rather than an official public footpath, but it was well enough used, so I kept walking, thinking nothing of it. At about 15 meters away from the path he took, Rowan shot back to my side immediately, dropping the mouthful of dirt he had been pretending not to eat. He's not the brightest. I petted him and noticed that he was standing super alert, staring at the path entrance. When I looked up, I caught a glimpse of the man peeking around the edge of the bushes that had concealed the entrance. I stopped dead on my tracks and Rowan's fur was stood on end as he positioned himself in front of me. It took me a second to realize that this man had been watching and waiting in the bushes for me to approach. My current route would have meant that I would be walking right by the path's opening. My stomach dropped as I realized we were the only ones around on that field. I had this weird moment where I was almost trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, but then the guy whistled. Not a wolf whistle, but as if to try and get my dog to come to him. Rowan was having none of that though, and I definitely took it as my cue to trust my stranger danger instincts. I immediately turned and sped walked back the way that we came, while simultaneously pulling my phone out and dialing my partner's number. I ended up having to clip on Rowan's lead, on to get him to walk with me, and he was not taking his eyes away from the path. He was even growling a little, which was so out of character and put me on edge even more. I glanced back and the man had edged slightly out of the bushes, watching me walk away. My partner answered the phone after a few rings. I was only halfway through stammering out the story and he was already sprinting up to the field to meet me, telling me to stay on the phone but keep an eye on the man. The man in the tracksuit now fully came out of the bushes and just stood staring at me, walking away. I dared a quick look away from him towards the entrance to the field, to see my fiancée jogging towards me. He was relieved that I was okay, but was also immediately pointing and shouting, "Is that him?" Clearly furious at what this man might have had in mind, had Rowan not picked up on him hiding in the bushes. I eventually convinced my fiancée not to confront him, as he was still stood staring, almost taunting us. You never know what people might be capable of or have concealed. We came off the field and took Rowan on a different walk, which he was more than happy about. I've never been so proud of Rowan for stepping up and protecting me. Safe to say, he got plenty of treats and fussing when we got home. So, creepy man in the bushes, let's not meet. I've had a stalker for over 2 years. I'm a 27-year-old female, and have worked with people with disabilities since I was 19. I was born with a rare genetic condition, and have been using my experience as a radical disability activist and advocate to help other people with disabilities in my community. During my time working in the disability community, I have been sexually harassed and assaulted several times by both men and women. When I first started working with the organization, I was working with my best friend's older brother, her older sister, and several of her aunts, uncles, and cousins. So in the beginning, I always felt safe. Like people would do anything to keep the creeps away from me. They would have. However, after several years, all my close friends slowly started leaving. Flash forward to a couple of years ago, when most of my closest friends were all gone, leaving me one of the most experienced and senior staff members, including all of the management and the board of directors. I've had a lot of bad experiences in these past 2 years, with the stuff stated above, but the worst part has been the lack of support from management. So, within the last few years, a client that we'll call Leonard, a male in his 50s, started to chat with me at community events. We often have parties or events that we invite the entire community to. From the very first moment that I met Leonard, I experienced chills creeping up and down my spine. Something about the way that he looked at me has always made me super uncomfortable, to the point that I'll do literally anything to get away from him, including helping folks in the bathroom. He's a really short white guy with shocking white hair and these clear blue eyes that are just empty. He's always really smiley and soft-spoken. He started off innocent enough. He would corner me at parties and talk until I found a reason to slip away. But at some point, he managed to get my personal cell phone number from a coworker, I still don't know who, and started calling me late at night and leaving long, rambling messages. I never answered the phone, and after a while, he stopped. He would still periodically call me though, despite me asking him politely in person to stop. He started cornering me in the office too, when no one was around, so I had a difficult time getting away from him. Every time that he cornered me, he would grab my arm or shoulder so I couldn't leave. More recently, like during the lockdown, he started calling the office and leaving messages on my work phone after hours. He wasn't even someone that I personally worked with. I asked my coworker who did work with him to please ask him to stop, and which she did. She spoke to him several times, but he would only ever stop for a week or two. And he always made a point to come and apologize directly to me, which almost always made me more uncomfortable. It started to get really bad about 3 weeks before I started working from home. He would forget his appointments, which were purposefully set on the one day in the week when I wasn't working in the office. He would come in the next day when he knew that I was working, and then he figured out when I got off, and would come in to meet with my coworker right before I got off work and to wait around until my shift ended. He started giving me little gifts, which I always refused. Every time he would get really offended, so then he started writing me poetry. Instead of just handing it to me, he would grab me and read over my shoulder and point out what every single line meant. I always tried to get other coworkers to help me, but no one saw anything as weird or bad or unsafe, despite the warning bells going off in my head. And then one day he cornered me and said he wanted to take me to the train station, because I usually walked. I asked him if he meant he wanted to walk me the 2 blocks. He shook his head and said, "No, I want to take you in my car so I can keep a better eye on you." It gave me instant chills. I told him no, but he kept insisting that it would happen before he finally left. I'm a tiny petite person, so the idea that he was following me long enough to know exactly which train station that I went to, and the line that I got on. There are several different lines going in several different directions, and even the direction that I was going really freaked me out. Enough to double up on the defensive measures I normally keep on me, including pepper spray and a taser. I told everyone. I told supervisors, HR, the associate director, everyone that I could think of. I had meetings with my direct supervisors where I explained everything that happened and why he was giving me the creeps. But they all just brushed me off, and one manager in particular said I was being too dramatic. He was just a sweet older man, doing nothing to harm anyone. Until the next time he came around. I told a couple of my coworkers, J and P, a 28-year-old male and a 26-year-old male, and they both agreed that one of them would always walk me out from now on. On cue, Leonard waited around until after I got off, but J and P, who said they had looked out for me, were both super busy, so the associate director said he would walk me out, still not believing that it was a big deal. We started walking and chatting like old friends, and the whole time, Leonard followed us. The associate director had to literally yell at him to finally get Leonard to leave. Right then, he finally realized how serious the situation was getting. The next day, one of the managers who was super rude and dismissive about the whole situation pulled me into her office and profusely apologized. After Leonard was yelled at and went back to the office, the manager had a conversation with him that really creeped her out on my behalf. Apparently he was saying things like, "My relationship with me is ours and has nothing to do with the organization. You have no right to tell me how to behave around me. She likes me and likes what I'm doing. I'm not making her uncomfortable. She needs me to watch out for her." That same day, the entire management team apologized for not taking immediate action. Especially since this is not the first time stuff like this has happened to me. I just asked that from now on, I have absolutely no contact with him. I reiterated several times that I absolutely do not want an apology. I want nothing. Since then, I've learned that Leonard has harassed and assaulted an old coworker who had to file a restraining order against him. This was told to me by the manager who originally dismissed my claims. She had dealt with the other situation, yet nothing was told to any of the other staff about this behavior. And not only that, she berated me in front of other staff for speaking out about my experience, saying that it wasn't that big of a deal, even though she knew he had done it before. If I never have to see that guy again, I will be eternally grateful. The situation was never fully resolved before lockdown. I'm very thankful I've been able to work from home, but I'm not sure how to proceed after restrictions are lifted, and I have to start going back out again. I was thinking about filing a restraining order. My husband and family really want me to, but I pretty much figured out that no one will take me seriously. This happened about 2 weeks ago. I was walking my dog on the normal route. Normally, I would be at sixth form studying my A-levels. However, as we all know, schools are closed. Due to the lockdown, the streets were very quiet. I was about 20 minutes from home when I clocked two men in a beaten-up blue van, driving past, staring and leering at me. Nothing too worrying, this happens a lot. However, I soon did start to worry. Obviously, the van is going to be going at a faster pace than me walking. So the van would drive, pause, wait for me to catch up and then drive a little bit ahead. Pause, wait for me to catch up, and it would keep repeating this. I thought perhaps they were looking for an address, but they seemed focused on me and my journey, and nobody was getting out of the van to do deliveries. I know the van that does the deliveries in this area, and this was not that van. I crossed the road so I was on the opposite side to the van in case they tried to grab me. I had a gut instinct they wanted to keep me within their sights while they worked up the courage and waited for the right opportunity to get me. While the van had gotten a few meters ahead, as they were waiting for me, and it was at an angle to their wing mirrors, they wouldn't see me, I ducked behind some hedges. Normally, I would have phoned my parents by this point. However, both of them are key workers and would not be able to leave their work. This left me at a vulnerable position, as I didn't want these two men knowing where I lived, where I was home alone. So I resisted the urge to sprint the last 5 minutes home. Me and my dog hid in the bushes for a while. The van drove past a few times and the men were peering out, but they didn't see me. I went home after I felt like they were gone, and thankfully they had. I checked the number plate when I got home, and I believe it was a fake as there were no matches. So, I used to be a security officer at a homeless shelter earlier this year. I worked there for 5 months before leaving. Before I really begin, I have tons of creepy and scary stories from my time there. So back in March, I was at work doing what I needed to do. On the ground floor was a daytime-only homeless shelter, and on the top was a government homeless outreach office. This is who my contract was through. But I had to keep the entire building secure even though the shelter was a different organization. The government office was the mental health branch, so it wasn't uncommon for crazy people to, well, act crazy. This particular day, an individual came up to pick up his medication. The man took the medication, walked over to the couch that sits in the office. The place is laid out like a doctor's office, and I was posted in the lobby. After sitting down, the guy starts digging through his backpack and pulls out a bag full of white pills. This instantly catches my attention. He grabs his pocket knife, doesn't open the blade, and smashed 3 or 4 pills. Uses his hand to make the dust into 3 lines. Then he snorts all the dust up. What remained he swept and flung off the table. This is now considered to be acting hostile and potentially illegal. So I walk over and start trying to ask the man to leave. He keeps telling me, I gotta take my meds. I inform him that he needs to leave some more, and then he says out loud without looking at me, you know, I got a suppressed 9mm in my bag. That'll make you and that receptionist shut up. Alarm bells start ringing. I know I have a potentially active shooter scenario in my hands, and I'm an unarmed officer. I calmly walk backwards to the receptionist and whisper her to get the other client up, call 911, and go lock herself in an exam room and to not open the door. She does this as well as informs the other caseworkers of the situation, and they all lock and barricade the doors. There are cameras in the lobby, so this was all recorded and turned over to the police. After many other attempts to get the man to leave and informing them that the police were called and en route, he gets up, gets in my face and tells me quietly, I'm coming back for you one day, and then storms out. The police arrive 5 minutes later. They examine the footage, put out a APB on the man, and take samples of the powder left on the table. A few days later, I'm informed that the man was found with no guns and no drugs, that the powder turned out to be an antipsychotic medication. He had allegedly lost the bottle that came in. Nothing bad happened, but still, as a 19-year-old unarmed security guard, it scared the crap out of me. For those curious, I still work for the same company. I now work third shift in a completely different location. So to the crazy homeless dude that threatened me with a silenced 9mm, let's not meet again. And I hope you aren't still thinking about seeing me again. This happened a long time ago, but a similar post made me think of this horrific experience that I had in my early 20s. My friend and I went into a JCPenney's, a store for clothes, kitchen items, jewelry, etc., for her to exchange a package of onesies for her infant daughter. We both had our toddler sons, sitting facing each other in a tandem stroller. After being in the store for a few minutes, they both started tugging back and forth on the package of onesies, the correct size my friend needed to exchange the originals for. I grabbed the package from them and threw it into the compartment under the stroller, ending the game of tug-of-war. My friend did a little more shopping. The boys did some more fighting and whining. She exchanged the onesies and cashed out the rest of her items. We left that store, got lunch in the food court, let the babies play in the play place, and grabbed coffee, ready to head out. As we received our coffees, a security officer approaches me and asks me what I stole. Completely dumbfounded, I tell him that I didn't steal anything. He tells me that he has me on video stealing, and if I confess, he'll go easy. I tell him that he's wrong. He can check my purse as I have nothing. He immediately pulls the package of onesies from the bottom of the stroller. Amidst our toddler screaming, she didn't notice that I had put the package at the bottom of the stroller, and she had grabbed another. She didn't pay attention because she bought other things, and I was trying to keep the boys from poking each other in the eyes. I tell the security guard that it wasn't intentional, and explain how the boys were grabbing on it, to which led to my throwing it to the bottom of the stroller. He goes on a rant on how he's heard every excuse in the book, and that I'm just making it worse for myself. So I bring up the timeline and ask, why if I intended to steal, for an infant that isn't mine by the way, why would I stay for lunch, let the kids play, and calmly sit down to have coffee? My friend also confirms that she has the infant daughter, and yes, the boys were annoying each other during our shopping trip. This apparently made the security guard upset, because he went to full-on commando mode, pulling me by the arm back to JCPenney's and into the security room. We get inside and I urge him to watch the security tape again, figuring it'll see the babies fussing and understand the confusion. He leaves me in the room for 45 minutes, to which I figure he had to have seen the babies fussing and fighting. Nope, he had come back in and he calls me a liar. He says it clearly showed me shoplifting, and he goes to call the cops. I'm frustrated, but I agree to the cops being called, because I figure they'll see the tapes and understand the mistake. He didn't like this either. He tells me that once the cops get involved, that he is required to call Child Protective Services, which will immediately open a case, and that they will have to take my son into custody until I have a court date. Keep in mind, I'm 23 at the time, and I've never been in a situation like this before, so I believed his lying ass. I break down crying, telling the guy that I'm being honest. I'm not a thief, I have a clean record. Why would I steal clothes for a child that isn't mine? He was cold. He told me the most innocent looking people are the ones who steal. He's heard every excuse and lie that you can think of. And I have 3 minutes to confess before he calls the cops and has my son taken away from me. I still insisted my innocence, because I was, and I begged for a manager. Bear in mind, my friend was outside the whole time with my son and hers, unbothered other than worrying about me. The security guard leaves and comes back 10 minutes later. No manager, but with a paper, which is basically a generic written confession, saying I shoplifted in the amount of $6.99, literally under $10, and that I agreed to pay restocking fees, loss and prevention fees, and to not enter the store for 3 years. Now I'm hysterically crying, pleading with him that I did nothing wrong. I'm not a shoplifter. The only thing I did was exercise poor judgment by not specifying to my friend that the onesies were on the bottom. He tells me that he has no sympathy for liars or thieves, and had already called the cops and they're on their way to arrest me and to take my son, unless I sign the paper. And so I panic, quickly sign the form, to which he releases me. I tell my friend, she drove, to hightail it out of the mall ASAP. After telling the story to her in the car, and other people later, I found out that it was all BS. The security guard had lied and manipulated me, and should have lost his job for that. But he was so far in my head that I didn't want to revisit the situation for even a second. It's been over a decade since this had happened, and I still get anxiety just thinking about it. So, rookie mall security guard, let's not meet again, ever. About 4 years ago, I worked as a laundress. I worked 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. and would often work alone. We usually have a security guard posted near the parking lot. They carry a radio and pepper spray, and later in the day they patrol the building. A new guy had started and I never saw him watching over the parking lot when I came in each morning. Throughout my shift, he would come into my laundry room. He was talkative, but I noticed he would look at my body a lot when he thought I wouldn't notice. One day I came into work and started putting my stuff away, getting ready to begin. I hadn't turned on all the lights yet, so there were parts of the room that I couldn't see. Suddenly I hear radio static in the corner of the room, and I see a red radio light. I turn on the lights and the new guy is in the corner of the room, hiding and watching me. When I asked him what he was doing there, he said he was just hanging out and started laughing. It was obvious that he was waiting for me. He ended up doing this so often that I got used to it. I came in early one day and was working in one of our smaller areas. He came into the smaller room to talk to me. He's a big guy, so I couldn't get around him. He was just talking to me, but I couldn't move or leave the room because he blocked the door. He asked me why I came in early that day, and I told him it was because I had to leave early later. He told me that I was required to tell him all of my hours so that he always knew where I was. He was leaning over me. He was very tall, and I felt like he was trying to upset me. I had this horrible feeling in my stomach that he was about to try something, so I pushed past him and called my supervisor, who said he would keep an eye on him. I told him that I had a bad gut feeling about this guy and that I needed to leave for the day. The next day, he was fired. Apparently, he wasn't in the guard tower at the start of the shift because he would spend mornings in the woods near the parking lot, recording girls walking in for their shifts each morning. They also found a huge collection of pop or soda cans and coffee cups in his locker that he had admitted that he had dug out from various trash bins around where I and the other girls worked. His wife shortly left him and took full custody of their newborn baby. So crazy security guard, let's not meet. For context, I'm a 5'3", 24-year-old female and working as a programmer for an IT company in the Philippines. Now, the area where my office is comprises of 3 buildings. Building A, where my office is, Building B, and Building C. To get to the other building, it would take you around 10 minutes to get there. It's important for later. This happened to me a year ago and around the end of February until March. I just got out of a bad breakup at that time, and I really intended to just focus on myself and not meet anyone yet. I just got out of work and it was around 7 p.m. on a Friday night, and I went to my usual waiting spot, which has benches and is located at the back of our building near the entrance of the underground parking lot, for our company shuttle and Omar, a shuttle dispatcher that's here. Now, I've known Omar for 2 years and he's someone I consider now as a friend, and we would often chat about our lives, even the breakup with my ex then, and joke around. He's a 40-plus-year-old guy and he gives out this big, fatherly vibe, so he's someone that I really trust. That night, he was there and with someone new that I didn't recognize. Our convo went like this. Omar says, "Oh, hi. Good thing you're here. I would like you to meet someone since he told me that he really wants to meet you for a long time now. And then this guy stood up and shook my hand. I greeted him as just to be polite, and this new guy, let's name him Ray. He's average looking and a little shorter to my height, 5'1", and he instantly gives an off vibe as soon as I shook his hand. I thought that would be the end of it, but he proceeded to talk to me for a few minutes while I wait for my shuttle to arrive. Omar has purposely left me and this Ray guy so that we could talk to get to know each other. I'm actually puzzled at this point because, 1, I have no clue who this guy is, and why would he be so eager to meet me? And 2, I clearly told Omar before that I'm not into meeting anyone just yet. But for the sake of being polite and nice, I talked to Ray, but we never reached any personal questions, exchanging numbers, social media accounts, or even telling him my full name. I just told him my nickname. And I left it just at that when I finally got on the shuttle. Fast forward to a week and Friday again. I got off at work at the same time and surprise, surprise, Ray is there again with Omar and a security guard. They were chatting, but as soon as I came, Ray instantly greeted me, and at this point, I'm a little creeped out, as I expected our encounter would only be a one-time thing. I just said hi and I brushed him off, and sat on the benches to wait for my shuttle again, and of course, as this guy doesn't seem to know the definition of personal space, sat beside me and talked to me again, but this time he asked for my cell phone number. I told him off and clearly said that I'm not giving out my number to strangers, and just giving him one-word answers just to give an impression that I wasn't interested at all. He would ask, "Why wouldn't you give me your number? I just want to be friends." And I could see in his face that he was getting frustrated every time I told him that I wasn't giving it to him. This happened while Omar and the security guard was looking at us from afar, but this went on until I got on the shuttle again. As soon as I got home, I mindlessly scrolled through my timeline and saw a notification that I have a new friend request, and guess what? It's Ray, and he even messaged me with a, "Please accept my request." I just deleted it, but now I'm pretty shocked since I didn't tell him my Facebook account, so how did he manage to find me? The following day was the last straw when I decided to get off at an earlier time, so that I could avoid him, but to my surprise, he was there again, waiting for me, along with Omar and the security guard. Ray immediately runs up to me to say hi, but I brush him off, and dreaded the fact that I would have to wait with this creep again when I saw that my shuttle isn't there yet. He immediately asked me if I accepted his Facebook request, and I decided to play dumb and said that I haven't been active on Facebook, and I haven't seen anything. He got disappointed and he fiddled with his phone for a bit, and then revealed his phone to show my Facebook profile, and asked me if this was me. I said yes, and this time, I was completely ignoring him at the point and playing with my phone and told him that I wasn't going to accept his request because I didn't know him. And then Ray grabbed my phone out of my hands angrily, and said that he was going to add himself using my Facebook account if I wouldn't. I muttered, "What the heck?" and grabbed my phone from him, and with perfect timing, I got on the shuttle in a hurry and told the driver to go. At this point, I could confirm that this guy could be stalking me, and now knows my daily schedule and social media accounts. I reported this incident to my manager, and told her how this was already happening for some time now. She was surprised that I didn't report it earlier, but I blamed it on my lack of assertiveness and fear that I must be overreacting to his advances. We reported the incident to office security and told them what happened, and they couldn't do anything at first as, 1, they need actual evidence about my allegations to him. 2, I only knew Ray by his first name, and they would need more information than that. I didn't bother to ask where he was from, or if he was even working in our opposite building, which is dumb of me, and I should have asked in the first place. My manager then decided that I should at least be accompanied by some of my office mates to confirm the situation, and the guys volunteered to accompany me every time I got off of work. They joined me for a couple of days, and no matter what time I got out, Ray was there to harass me. I felt bad for my office mates, as they had to deal with his BS as well. The first instance when he saw me with my office mates, I could see the visible anger in his eyes, and he would try to butt into our conversation even if I were ignoring him. At one point, when I'm talking with my office mates, he let out an exasperated sigh and said, "Can I talk to you for a second, please?" "What do you want?" "I just want to talk to you. If you don't, I'll leave." "Okay." And then I went back to talking to my office mates. He butted in once more and asked that I should introduce him to my office mates. And when I didn't, he proceeded to introduce himself instead, which irked the heck out of my office mates and I, as his behavior doesn't seem normal at all. After that incident, my office mates and I told my manager what happened and how dangerous this guy might be. She decided that we should escalate it to HR and have them deal with it immediately. Gladly, HR responded, and they took the situation seriously and began to do an investigation on who Ray might be. The same day, they sent an email that, after searching through records, it turns out Ray wasn't an employee of our office, and they might need to talk to building security to find out more about this guy. HR also requested our office security to escort me in to observe the situation. I honestly felt relieved, as now I'll feel safe for the time being, while they search who Ray might be. He still showed up even if I got out later earlier than usual, but never went near me when he saw I was accompanied by security. But he would just keep his distance and stare at me, smile creepily, and linger outside my shuttle until I left. HR contacted me for a meeting with him and with my manager about some news on Ray, and I was shocked by the information that they had found. Ray was not an employee of our building or office, but in fact, a temp in the security office in Building C. I then thought, okay, this creep is really putting in an effort for someone who is clearly not interested, and if he's a temp meeting, there's a chance I won't be able to see him after this. But then, what HR said, it chilled me to the bone. He was a temp assigned to work on these security cameras, meaning he had access to all the building cameras. It had been his way to spy on me, and the reason why he was able to be there at the exact time that I got out. HR had already spoken to his supervisor and gave a warning to Ray, and of course, Ray denied the allegations, even if I had witnesses against him. The supervisor wanted to apologize to me in person, but I decided not to, as I just wanted this to be over with. After that meeting, I never saw Ray again, and I reckoned he must have been kicked out after HR issued a warning against him. As for Omar, I never saw him as well, and I felt bad, but he was also part of the people who enabled Ray, and didn't do anything when I was clearly getting harassed. I received a bit of backlash from the security guards in the building for a while as well, hearing them say that I was overreacting, and I should have accepted his advances, which was disgusting as I heard the same thing being said by female building staff as well. Nothing strange happened for a few days, but then the security guard that was with Omar at the time when Ray was harassing me added me on Facebook, but I didn't make much of it and I just deleted the request. I'm still working in the same office and building as of today, and I've been totally shaken up by the incident that I decided to just keep my distance from people so I could avoid this from ever happening again. And to Ray, no means no FFS, and let's not meet again. I've been doing my 1 hour of outdoor exercise at night because I find it the most relaxing. My neighborhood is very quiet and I'm lucky to live in a nice area which I've always considered super safe. I used to walk at night even before the lockdown because I live right next to a canal, so there are lots of nice paths that are super pretty at night when everything is all lit up by the moon. Anyway, I was walking last night and decided to go to the shop first because I was hungry, and then detour back to my usual route along the canal. When I was walking, I heard two guys speaking super loudly in German. I live in England, so it was a bit unusual, but not anything that I thought twice about. They looked around 30, pretty tall, and they had caps on, which I remember because they had matching designs, which I thought was funny. They started getting really close, and when I glanced back to look at them, they started jeering, so I knew they were looking at me, which kind of freaked me out. So I sped walked towards the shop, but had to stop at the road. I wasn't planning on getting hit by a car. They caught up with me, but they didn't stop for the lights to change. They just walked across and went into the store that I was headed for. So I shrugged off my hunger and decided to just go to the canal for my walk. I stopped thinking about the men soon after, chalking it up to me being a generally anxious person. I don't particularly like walking past strangers at night, and I'm self-conscious enough as it is without them talking to or about me. Anyway, I complete my walk and I'm headed back home. For the story to make sense, I need to describe where I was stood. On my right, there is the water itself. I'm stood on the path, and to my left, there's a big drop that goes straight into the main road. Next to that road, there's a row of houses, and there's a railway bridge in front of me. I have my earphones in and my music is pretty loud, but I think I hear someone shouting, so I take one earphone out, and I listen. But it's pretty silent apart from passing cars on the road below me. That's when I see two men heading towards the bridge, and I immediately recognize them as the two guys who had jeered at me before from their cabs. I stop walking as my anxiety floods back, and consider phoning somebody because I irrationally think if I'm on my phone when they walk past me, that they won't bother me. But despite the fact that I've been stood frozen for ages, nobody comes out from under the bridge. I wait, staring at the bridge for a while in complete confusion, because there's no way they could have just vanished. I can see through to the other side of the bridge, so I knew they didn't turn around and walk away or anything, but they certainly hadn't walked through because no one had passed me. After a few minutes, I start to think that I'd hallucinated them or something. I have no history of hallucinations, but I couldn't explain it any other way. So I started slowly walking towards the mouth of the bridge, and just as I'm about to step in, I see it. The shadow of one of the men cast across the wall. My blood literally ran cold as I realized what was going on. They were waiting for me on the other side of the bridge, but they must have been hidden behind the abutment so I wouldn't see them. My mind went to a million different places, panicking about what they would do if I walked under that bridge. I was convinced they would just follow me. If I stayed where I was and phoned for help, I was certain they would come out to see what was going on, and I would be trapped. I did the only thing that I could think to do. I quietly ran to the fence that separated the canal path from the drop to the main road, and I climbed it. It was only about up to my thigh. And on the other side, there is a small space before the wall and drop itself. I waited for a couple of moments as the cars passed, but thankfully, I live in a quiet area, so the road was soon empty. I managed to navigate myself so I could lower myself off the drop without A, making much noise, or B, hurting myself too much. And the moment my feet hit the road, I raced to the side where the houses were, and I sped walked down that path as fast as I could without making noise, only glancing back when I was nearing the end of the road. The men were still there next to the bridge. I could see that they were looking through the bridge to see where I had gone to. I felt sick and terrified, but I made it home. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know who they were, if they'll be there again tonight. But I do know that I'm not going to be walking at night for a very long time. Strangers under the bridge. Let's not meet. This could maybe be nothing, but it seemed really weird. So, I was walking around my neighborhood because I'm living with my parents, and I wanted to smoke a little before going to bed. And I didn't want to smoke inside and stink up the place. I figured there would be nobody walking around since we were on lockdown and it's nearly midnight. And even if there was someone walking around, it's unlikely that they would care that I was smoking. About 5 minutes after I left my house, I see a black pickup truck drive past me. I don't really take too much notice of it because you still occasionally see people driving around. I get to the end of the street where he drove past me, and I see him again, driving back up the street. I just assumed that he forgot something before setting off and was driving back to grab it. I walk for another 5 to 10 minutes and I see him drive past me again. I start to get a bit paranoid at this point because for him to drive past me this third time would mean that he was driving in a complete opposite direction he was originally driving, and because I'm smoking and listening to a true crime podcast. I realized that walking around alone at night while smoking and listening to podcasts about serial killers is a recipe for paranoia. Yeah, I'm stupid, but I'm usually completely fine. I know my area well and it's easy to spot anything out of the ordinary. So I carry on walking, but I go in a different direction to what someone might expect had they seen me walking at night, just in case he was following me. And I'm not really listening to the podcast anymore, just looking out for this black pickup truck. But lo and behold, guess who I see driving past me again? At this point, I'm absolutely crapping myself because for him to have driven past me again, he would have had driven in a very specific way. So I can only assume he's following me. I then proceed to stop walking and just face the truck as it's driving towards me and stare him out. This is probably a very stupid idea, as I have no fighting experience and it's not like I'm super strong or anything. But I wanted to make it seem like I wasn't scared of him, and I was ready to defend myself if he decided to pull over and attack me. Despite the fact that I was terrified of him, and I would probably lose a fight. But the weird thing is that he didn't even glance at me. He just looked straight ahead and kept driving. I find this weird for two reasons. One, because there is no possible way that he didn't notice this was his fourth time driving past me. The road and the path that I've been walking on were very close proximity and there was no one else out. And two, because I literally stopped in my tracks to stare him out. He would have noticed this, as it's not very often that people stop in their tracks just to stare you out driving. He drives off again, and at this point, I'm freaked out. So I run to a thicket that someone who doesn't know the area well would know about, so that he couldn't see me from the road. I call my friend who lives nearby and basically say, "This is gonna sound strange, but there's a black pickup truck just driving around our neighborhood over and over again." My friend is like, "Okay, let me go check." We're on the phone and he's outside looking down the street for his truck. I ask, "Do you see him?" And he says, "Nah, I can't. Wait a minute." And he goes silent for a few seconds. "Holy crap, that's him. Crap, I'm going inside. What the heck?" So I'm hiding, still on the phone to my friend after he goes inside. Luckily, my friend has cameras outside of his house, so he's watching his monitors as we're chatting. This truck drives past his house another 2 times in the span of about 5 to 7 minutes. We both agree that this is really weird, and I called the police, a non-emergency number, to report it, and they tell me that they'll send a unit down to check it out. I then call my dad to pick me up, and he comes straight away to get me because he doesn't care about me smoking and he's an absolute hero. I get back home and I ring my friend to ask him for updates. This black truck drove past his house 15 times in the time it took me to get back home, which took maybe 20 minutes. After the 15th time, he saw a police van driving down the street, and we didn't see the black truck again, so maybe the police found him. But they haven't updated me, so I don't know. I tried to logically figure out an explanation for it afterwards. I thought maybe he was a pizza delivery man, but that didn't make sense because he wasn't slowing down to look at the numbers of the houses. And surely after the 20th time of driving around this very small area, you would just bring the person that you're delivering to. Or maybe even pull over and ask me, since I clearly know the area if I'm walking around it at night. And then I thought maybe he was looking for his dog or something. But that really didn't make sense either because the area that he was driving around was so small. If your dog was lost, he would cover a much larger area than just this one little area 20 times. So, any ideas on what he was doing? This was back in 2015 when I was 16. It was during the summer and both my parents were heading out of town to visit some relatives, and they wouldn't be home for 3 days. I was the only child and I was the only one left in the house. My grandma did visit me every single day to make me lunch. But of course, she wouldn't stay during the night. And that's when I went wild. Watching movies, gaming, watching YouTube. Everything that you could picture a 16-year-old doing when his parents weren't home. So, the second night I was watching a movie, and I ran out of chips and I paused the movie and went down in the kitchen to grab some more. And then I heard a window break and a door opening. The kitchen was separate to the living room, where the door was opened. I grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly peeked my head around. And there he was. A tall man around 6 foot. He had a baseball cap, some old jacket, probably leather. It was torn on the right sleeve. And my phone was in the room upstairs. From the kitchen door, the stairs were directly to its right, so in my mind, I was thinking that I could sneak past him and lock myself in. He was going through the shelf next to the door. Very loudly, I must say. And so I got to the stairs somehow, and he turned around and realized that I was there. Out of fear, I guess, I screamed and I threw the knife at him. I missed him, but it hit the wall beside his head, sticking the knife in it. This somehow scared him off because he ran out, maybe scared that I would throw more knives at him. I did run back to get another. My adrenaline was pumping at the time. When I saw that he did leave, I ran to my room and I called the police. They came quickly and just took fingerprints and any DNA samples that they could find. The next morning, I called my parents and they came back around noon. I don't know why, but I had kept the knife lodged in the wall next to the door. So, making sense, the first question they asked when they got home was, why was there a knife in the wall? We eventually changed the front door with a more heavy-duty one. They found the guy too and they arrested him the same week. Apparently the intruder wanted to call the cops on me for supposed assault. I guess the moral of the story is hide when someone is robbing your house, or learn how to act like a maniac. This happened a few weeks ago and I'm still rather shaken up. I'm a 19-year-old, low-level retail associate at a nationwide chain store. I've worked here a little over a year and so far, I can honestly say that I enjoy my job. On a normal day, there will be 3 or 4 of us plus one manager, sometimes both, and we'll split up the tasks. Work the registers, tidy up the store, help customers with stuff, unload freight, stock the shelves, your typical retail stuff. It can be backbreaking work and people can be downright horrible. But at this point, I basically just developed an apathy for it. Since the quarantine though, it's down to one manager and 1 or 2 workers. Anyway, it was a pretty quiet morning. It was pouring outside and we had just opened so people weren't really coming in droves. I was at the front of the store and feeling rather drowsy from the rain, kind of mindlessly dusting off a shelf of clearance soaps, when an older man came in. He was maybe in his late 60s or 70s, wearing kind of shabby clothing, and had headphones connected to an outdated MP3 player. I was kneeling so he didn't see me and instead went over to my coworker to pester her about why we didn't have a mirror in the front of the store for people buying accessories. We sell a few scarves, hats, sweaters, and maybe the odd purse, but we aren't a clothing store. So I mentally wrote him off as a mere nuisance and I went back to work. My manager came out to do something and he greeted her by name, which isn't too unusual, as we have a lot of regulars. As he started telling her about some new job he got while she engaged him in small talk at the other end of the store, a mom and her kids walked in the door and asked me about lampshades. Well, I thought, he's the manager's problem now, and I didn't think anything more about it. More time passed, the lampshade family left, and eventually, I was left by myself at the front. The rain was still coming down pretty heavily, so I left my post briefly to get one of those caution wet floor signs. But other than that, I found myself standing at the registers with not much to do. It had been an hour or so. I honestly thought that the man had left, but he came shuffling up to the register with a hat, some headphones, and a little spice bottle of rib seasoning that cost less than $1. That detail is important, I swear. As I was ringing him up, He made conversation with me. He asked how old I was, which I thought was a little weird, but I didn't think too much of it. The whole time he seemed off. I couldn't explain why at the time, but something just made my skin crawl. I was glad to see him leave. To my surprise, though, he was back within half an hour. I was still alone at the front and he came straight to me to return the seasoning that he had bought. Since it was like 75 cents, I asked if anything was wrong with it. He said no, he had just found a better deal. On top of the earlier feeling that I'd had, I thought that was kind of bizarre. Why go looking for a better deal? Why return it if it costs so little? Even if I was a little weirded out, I got started on the return. He again asked my age and started complimenting the way that I looked, saying how pretty I was. I don't think any teenager likes having a creepy older man ogle them, and I was definitely uncomfortable. He repeatedly made sure that I was over 18. I finished that transaction in a hurry and watched him leave. 10 minutes later, he walked to the door again. I was starting to get a little nervous, so I started looking around for my coworker, but she had taken a break. He purchased a jacket for a small dog this time, but was very weird, saying his sister had just had a baby or something. I was wondering if he knew that it was clothing for a dog. I took a deep breath and started totaling up the purchase as quickly as I could. Once again, he asked if I was over 18, and kept calling me his new boo. I could see him practically undressing me with his eyes, and felt completely grossed out. I stopped engaging in conversation, and plastered a smile on my face as I handed him his receipt. This time, I made sure I saw him walk out the door and into the parking lot. 10 minutes passed and he didn't come back. 15 minutes, 20. I'm starting to feel relieved. And then he's back again. I'm starting to panic. Where's my manager? Where is my coworker? He buys another dog jacket and strikes up conversation again. At this point, I'm just giving him one-word answers, trying not to be rude and trying not to puke. He's still calling me his boo. He asked my age again. He asked where I live, when I work, and where did I go to college. What days do I attend class? It's getting really invasive and creepy. Since we're often unloading boxes and stuff, I wear a lanyard with my ID, a box cutter, and my house key around my neck. The ID is a habit from school, since you need your ID to get into anywhere on campus. He notices this, and I can see him trying to read my full name and address. I try to move away and he grabs it, still around my neck, and he pulls me closer to him, almost over the counter. I go into panic mode and I look around for something sharp. I grab the scissors from the cup next to me and say, "Don't touch me," as loud as I can. He lets go and reads my full name out loud, commenting on how pretty it is. Hearing my shout, my coworker comes to the front to see what's going on, and the man finally leaves. Once he was gone, I hurriedly made up an excuse to go to the bathroom, and I called my mom panicking. I was afraid that he would come back again, but the rest of my shift passed without too many more incidents. When I walked out to my car after my shift, I saw him in a beat-up truck loitering around the lot. I took a roundabout way home and got out of there as fast as I could, but I couldn't stop thinking about how he had seen my full name and home address on my ID. Can't believe I was dumb enough to wear that thing where people could see it. I've always enjoyed work because of my coworkers and managers, but since then, I've been a nervous wreck going in. The first week, I was able to find excuses to avoid the registers, but I sprained my ankle, and it seemed logical for the one-legged girl to stay up in front and not hobble around moving heavy stuff and whatnot. I finally broke and told my managers what had happened, and they've been really great about finding out who the guy is from the tapes, and making sure that I haven't been left alone since, just in case he comes back. I feel like I've seen his car driving around my neighborhood a few times since then, but part of me also believes it could just be my paranoia. I know that as a woman in America working in customer service, stuff like this is going to happen to me, and there's nothing that I can do about it. especially since I have to smile and act nice because I can't be rude to customers. But still, I've been pretty freaked out these past few weeks. Old guy who thinks that I'm his boo. Let's not meet again. A few months back, my girlfriend and I were bored hanging around the house, and spontaneously decided to go for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appealed to both of us. And even though there was only about an hour left of light, we figured we had enough time to enjoy a hike before it got too dark. We quickly filled up our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes that we had, and we were out the door, driving up into the mountains. Around my area, there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go up into the mountains. We tended to stay around the base of the mountains in the occasional case of us hiking, where most people would still be walking, but we wanted to change things up and progressed further up the mountain road to a trail a friend of mine had mentioned. We kept in mind our time and figured that we could hike for a bit, and simply enjoy the new environment for us, and finish up before it was too late. We arrived at the trailhead and see that there are no cars left along the road where the trail commences, but didn't think much of it due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, so we continued on. We start walking down a fairly steep hill that then recoups the elevation at the bottom, with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top and then it's smooth sailing from there. We see a lone coyote off the trail a ways off, and some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with that coyote lurking around. She playfully hit me for that one. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we see a large fallen tree that made a bridge over a dried riverbed, and decided to take a rest and climb around on it and take pictures. We were there for about 10 minutes and then resume hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance, until she hears a rustle in the trees behind us. We stop, mildly spooked due to the assumed size of whatever made that rustling, but continue on, only briefly before she decides she's done, and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her, and we turn around and head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my loose laces, and looked behind us for the first time on the hike. Uncharacteristic of me, but hey, I was having fun, why be paranoid? I see a person that was dressed entirely in black with their hood on, that was a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. It wasn't something out of the ordinary, so what if they're wearing black with their hood on? I wear black most of the time and it's cold out. I shouldn't make assumptions. This does trigger me to be more alert, however, and I inform my girlfriend of this person's presence. It's now dusk. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace, and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final bend of the section, I figure they are far behind us, and that there's nothing to worry about. Sooner rather than later, the person is behind us again, but much closer. Probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before. And we had increased our speed, so this alarmed us. We briskly walk around another bend, and as soon as we come around it, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction of both of our parts, as we just started running without a word said to initiate it. We are nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breaths for a moment, and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly halt a sprint upon noticing me looking back, as if they were trying to uphold the illusion of simply walking. At this point, I shout, "Go!" and we sprint down the hill. What little light was left struggled to make its way through the dense trees surrounding us, and the steep hill proved challenging to run down without a clear path to be seen. We both stumbled down the hill, almost falling multiple times and slamming our feet onto rocks and loose brush, but we didn't fall and we didn't look behind us. We make it to the bottom, but must continue up the initial hill and then we will have made it out. We persevere up the incline and make it back to our car. I briefly breathe in relief as I start my car, heart pounded and adrenaline racing. As I reverse onto the road, the person emerges at the trailhead, apparently breathing heavily. We finally got a glimpse of him. His hood had fallen off his head, exposing his pale complexion and dead eyes that were only illuminated by a single lantern at the start of the trail. He was holding something in his hand, but it was too dark to see, and I was not interested in sticking around to make out the object. I shift into drive and accelerate as fast as my car could muster, leaving him behind in the dust of the empty side of the road. Last year, I was hiking in Virginia. It was a planned 2-day hiking trip, myself and 2 friends. Late into the first day, one of my friends grew ill and decided to turn back. The second friend joined him, just in case it got worse. They told me to go on, and seeing as I had been looking forward to the trip, I did. As evening approached, I came upon a clearing in the forest. On a table surrounded by tools and several cans of spray paint was an elaborate dollhouse. It was large, perhaps 3 feet tall. Its walls and windows were open, as if it had just been built and was drying. That lingering smell of spray paint still hung in the air around it. On the back of the house, a photo had been affixed. It was a family picture, old, perhaps taken in the 80s. Everyone in the picture looked very uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be taking the picture, or they were forced to. Not scared, just very uncomfortable. I left it and continued on so that I might reach my planned campsite by nightfall. The wind had picked up considerably. In the distance, I heard a branch give and fall, crashing to the forest floor, startling me. I found my campsite, but was a bit unnerved by the dollhouse in the middle of nowhere. I realized that I didn't want to camp out in the open where whoever was working on it might stumble upon me. I had one of those little one-person tents that stand just tall enough for a person to lay down in. I set it up behind a thick stand of brush, one side blocked off by a tall stand of rocks. I was glad for this, because not only was I now hidden, but the rocks effectively blocked the heavy winds, which had now turned cold as the frigid air tumbled down from the mountains at night. The sound of the wind churned forest was relaxing, and I think I fell asleep right away. Have you ever been awoken by a loud sound and you're unsure what it was exactly, but some remnant of it echoes in your mind for a moment after waking? That's what happened to me sometime later, in the pitch dark. I had the sensation that someone was near. I listened intently, trying to hear over the wind. I heard a man's voice somewhere in the distance, harsh, rapid, and then becoming softer. He was too far away for me to discern what he was saying, but close enough that I could hear inflection and cadence. It sounded like a crazy person scolding himself, and then his voice becoming softer, answering. As I listened, his voice grew louder and louder, until I could hear his clumsy footfalls crashing towards me. He walked by where I was camped, just several feet away from the brush that concealed me. By now my eyes had adapted somewhat to the pale moonlight, but I still couldn't make out anything more than a large, massive shape. He was probably about 6'6", heavily built. He was carrying something long beneath his arm. A rolled-up tent, I guessed. He was angrily talking about someone's face and how it haunted him. His voice then became childlike, and his conversation with himself turned to the topic of cheese and crackers. The dude was clearly off his rocker, that or high on something really good. After a moment, he continued on, his voice receding until I could no longer hear him. I slept little that night afterward. At first light, I booted back the way that I came, back to town. I noticed that the dollhouse was not in the clearing when I passed back by. Whoever the stranger was that night, I'm glad that we did not meet. So, a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of western Maryland, and we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop that we have done frequently when we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at a summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches and tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and talking, and I noticed a man just walking around the parking lot alone. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me is that he was in jeans and a button-down shirt, not exactly hiking attire. We decided to set off in the last 2-mile leg of the loop. This part goes down a hill to the headquarters of the park, and is cut out of the mountain bank. The end of that leg is the parking lot where our car is. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail and you have to walk single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turn to look at her and I see the same man right behind her, following at a rudely close distance. I immediately got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have any pack or hiking gear, and he wasn't even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really spooked me. So a bit more walking and he continues to fall very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe, as a reason to step off the trail and let him pass us, in case he is only following closely because he wants to go faster than we are. She immediately catches on to what I'm doing and we pull over. He looks startled and she says hello politely. He just stares. This is when I notice that he is carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stands between us and he passes us. We wait for him to give some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slows down. We wait for a bit longer and he gets up to the furthest part of the trail that has sight lines to us, and he turns around, looking up at us. We decided that something feels too wrong about this guy, and we don't want to have to pass him again. So we turn around and we walk back up the trail towards the park with the tables and parking. A few minutes of walking up the trail, I look back and I see him walking up the trail too. He's following us. I tell my friend to walk faster. We book it up the trail and get to the parking lot area that we were at before. We start to strategize and wait, deciding that we will wait to see if he comes back up the trail to the lot. There are more people around here, so we felt safer after waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by and nothing. We are talking about how that could mean that he kept going on the trail and he is long gone, or is waiting on the trail where it is more deserted. We see a couple come up from the trail where we were, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction that we are. We approach them and ask if they saw anyone on the trail between this lot and the next. They tell us that they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They describe the man who was following us. We explain our interaction with him to his wife, and get into a conversation back and forth about whether or not he was a threat. The husband finally interjects and says, "We need to call a ranger." He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and was carving that stick. Needless to say, we called a ranger. The nice couple walked that last leg with us to make sure that we got to our car safely, and then even gave us their numbers in case we needed anything. The rangers then walked the trail, but there was no sight of him. I wish I knew where he went and what happened to him, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legitimate. So, creepy knife-carrying man in the woods. It's not meat. So, it's the summer of 2013. I'm 21 and I just finished my junior year in college. The second week of August, a group of my friends and I go on an 8-day camping trip. It's 7 of us in total, 4 guys and 3 girls. We're camping in a semi-remote campground in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was a large campground, but very few other campers were there. There were a few filled sites near the front of the campground, but we purposely requested a site off in the back corner. We were completely by ourselves. During the trip, we planned a whitewater rafting trip for one of the days. We were hiking Mount Washington towards the end of the trip, and thought maybe we would do 1 to 2 other small hikes, with 1 to 2 days of just chilling by the lake at the campground. We also planned on doing plenty of drinking during the evenings. The first couple of days during the trip were fantastic. Whitewater rafting was a blast, everything is going great. And so, it's the evening of our third day. We have a roaring fire going. We're all just hanging out at the campsite, drinking and messing around. It's around 9:30 when a disheveled-looking man walks past our site. His clothes are kind of torn and worn out. He had messy, tangled hair, etc. He looked maybe to be in his mid-40s. This wasn't weird though. We all just think that he's another camper doing a late evening stroll around the campground. Around an hour and a half later, we see the same man past our site in the same direction, but this time he's walking slower, almost with a bit of a limp. We're all pretty drunk at this point. I think one of us might have yelled something out to him, but he just ignored us and keeps walking. Mildly strange, but still, it's probably just someone who wanted to take a long walk. We wrap up the night at around 1:30 or 2. The fire is dying down and we head back to our tents. I usually love sleeping while camping. I usually find it extremely peaceful, but for some reason, I was having trouble sleeping this night. I get up to take a piss in the woods, and when I do, I see a faint light maybe about 50 to 75 yards ahead of me in the woods. It looks like a dim flashlight or something similar. I decide that I want to investigate. I go back to the tent. One of my other buddies is still awake, so I tell him about it. We get up to investigate, and when we do, the light is no longer on. Feeling a little unnerved, I shine my flashlight around the woods a bit, but don't see anything, so I decide maybe my eyes were playing a trick on me before, and I head back to bed. Sometime later that night, I wake up to a terrifying scream. It was Sarah, one of the girls that we were camping with. I jump out of my tent as quickly as possible and nearly run into her as she's running back into our site. She's still screaming. She screams that there's a man standing in the middle of the woods. Now our whole party is awake and freaking the heck out. I try to calm Sarah down enough to get her to explain what actually happened. She says that she went to pee in the woods and saw the man from earlier just standing about 15 feet from her, not moving like a statue. We're all freaking out, yelling, screaming, making a giant commotion. I'm internally freaking out too, but try to calm everyone down enough so we can actually do something. We obviously decide to get the heck out of there. We frantically take down our tents, basically just ripping the poles out and throwing everything into the back of our cars. And then we sped out of there. It's around 4 a.m. We're in 2 separate cars and decide to just drive away from the campsite and try to clear our heads. Eventually, at around 5:30, we find a small diner that's open and decide to head in for some breakfast. We all have different theories about what the heck just happened. Some of us think that we just ran into a homeless guy who was camping out in the woods and was surprised by us. Some of the girls think maybe he was purposefully stalking us. Either way, none of us are comfortable staying at that campground again. I head back to the front desk of the campground with 2 of the other guys. We explain what happened, and the guys at the front desk actually seemed to believe us, but said that there was definitely no other campers currently that fit the description of the guy. They were insanely nice about it though, and actually refunded most of the remainder of our stay, which astonished me. As a group, we decided that, forget it, we weren't letting one freaky guy ruin our trip. We find another campground a good ways away to stay in. Fast forward 2 days, we're hiking Mount Washington. We get up really early and get to the mountain at around 7:30 to start hiking up. We're a little over halfway up the mountain when we see the very same guy hiking down, though this time he looks much better. His hair isn't crazy. His hiking clothes are relatively clean. We're all just frozen. A few of us let out a surprised scream. He just strolls past us with a massive grin. Luckily, there are enough hikers nearby that nothing could really happen. We decide to continue hiking up anyways, since he was headed in the opposite direction, and hope that we just never encounter him again. We did finish the hike and luckily didn't see him. After that, we did decide to cut the trip a couple of days short. Looking back on it, we've all come to the conclusion that we were likely being stalked in some way. If it was just some homeless guy in the woods near the campground, what the heck was he doing hiking down Mount Washington a couple days later? It was a pretty unnerving and bizarre experience for sure. Back in my high school years, I would often meet with a few friends at a local Dunkin' Donuts, which was conveniently near a railway we would all take to our weed guy's house. My closest friend at the time, Katie, and I usually met up earlier than everyone else just to hang out, order our extra large drinks and hash browns, and attempt at some "Hey Mister" shenanigans to score some tall boys from anyone willing to buy us a beer. I would consider us to be pretty naive and overly nice girls, which never proved to be an issue to either of us, until we were nice to the wrong person. Now, for a little background of my hometown. I grew up in the forgotten borough of NYC, Staten Island. For those who are unaware, there was, and kind of still is, a pretty horrendous opioid epidemic. So seeing zombie-like civilians strolling the streets is fairly common. Because of this, I became pretty good at spotting out someone struggling with heroin and things of the sort. Anyways, on this one day, Katie and I met up at Dunkin' and sat at our usual booth. We were in the midst of messing around with our phones and being our overly giggly selves when I noticed out of the corner of my eye, someone suddenly stopped outside of the glass door. Still smiling, I glanced over to see if it was maybe one of our friends, and ended up making direct eye contact with a basic, Staten Island looking dude. I looked away unbothered and I carried on. Just another customer anyways. After this guy got his coffee, he sat directly at the table across from our booth. I chose to ignore the fact that he sat weirdly close and resisted eye contact, since that already awkwardly happened. But I guess the emotion caught Katie's attention, and she looked over her shoulder at the man settling in. She looked back at me, made a face that said, okay, and we just giggled and tried to move on. Every now and then, I glanced in his direction, mainly just because I like to be observant of my surroundings, but also because I kept seeing him scratch at his nose, neck and face in my peripheral vision, and noticed that he was bleeding from various little cuts on his body. This was a dead giveaway he was doing some form of opioid, as they tend to get very itchy and scratch until they break skin. A few minutes later, the man asked if one of us had a charger that he could borrow. I kindly denied, and Katie only had an iPhone charger, while the man clearly had an Android phone. This slight exchange was enough for the man to feel invited, and he had continued to make comments for quite some time. Being that this was about 4 years ago, I don't remember the entire conversation, but I do remember him often asking general questions like if we live around here, what we do on our free time, and creepy things of the sort. I was pretty vague yet polite in my responses, but Katie was always a bit more enthusiastic in her words, making it pretty easy for this guy to reciprocate and basically join our conversation altogether. In Katie's innocent stupidity, the guy basically found out some of the main train stops that we would get off at to hang in those areas. He also found out that we would indulge in the devil's lettuce, which only made this guy feel even more inclined. At some point he mentioned how his ex-girlfriend got him into some trouble, got him into drugs while he used to sell, served jail time for, and pretty recently got out. He also mentioned how he's been an ice cream truck driver ever since his release, and told us that he always drives around the train stops Katie mentioned earlier. He also repeatedly offered to give us rides around in his truck someday, with free ice cream as the bribe. Again, we were pretty naive and overly nice girls, Katie more so than I, so one thing led to another and eventually, this guy was asking for Katie's social media, which she happily obliged to. She's always been really dedicated to expanding her follower count. Throughout this entire exchange, and I was mostly just nodding, smiling, laughing here and there, so remaining silent during the social media exchange went unnoticed. However, once the guy started following Katie on Instagram, he quickly found mine through a tagged picture on her page. I wasn't private at the time, so he immediately started liking and commenting on nearly every one of my pictures. These comments were extremely cringy, consisting of heart eyes and water squirt emojis and things like, "Damn, ma." Finally, after the longest half hour ever, I urged that we should really be catching our train. Fortunately, the man wasn't persistent after that, and we were on our way with no trouble. After some verbal recap of what had just happened, I convinced Katie to block him, and I did the same. We brushed it off at that. I honestly forgot about the strange interaction until about a week later. I was hanging out with some friends at a park near my high school when munchies made me crave Ralph's Ice, which was just up the block. I ventured off with one other friend and almost made it to the store before the sound of an ice cream truck approached from behind us. Completely lost in conversation, my attention was only caught by the high-pitched screeching of the truck's brakes and a somewhat familiar voice. Of course it was him. He shouted out to me, but with Ralph's only a couple feet in front of us, I ignored him and I rushed in with my friend. The guy didn't stick around long because he was blocking the whole lane on a narrow two-way road, but we still called our friend at the park to pick us up in his car. For the next 2 weeks, there were about 4 times that this man tried to pick me up in his truck. At this point, making me pretty paranoid, I was potentially being stalked. The last time it happened, he was parked directly outside of my house on the train stops, almost as if he was waiting for me. He again called out to me asking why I blocked him, and saying that he just wanted to be friends. At this point, I had had enough and told him to just leave me alone. My dad's a lieutenant, which was a lie, but I slipped it out in my defense. I walked away before he could respond, and into the diner I was meeting my friends at that night. I saw his truck drive away in the window, and never had an interaction with the ice cream man again. The sound of an ice cream truck has haunted me ever since. This all happened within the last 2 or 3 hours. My mom and I have been trying to catch the ice cream truck all summer, as they have some certain ice cream bars that you can't really get anywhere else around here. We were in the middle of watching a show when we suddenly heard the ice cream truck outside. It was loud, signifying that it was close. I got up and I went to the door. I saw that it was in front of our house, and began to say that it was too late, but then I realized that it was slowing down, not driving away. Now this wasn't an, "Oh, there's someone coming, I should stop, slow down." It was a, "I've been slowing to a stop since before you opened the door, slow down." My mom told me to go out to make sure that he didn't drive away. It was odd, and it was just about 9 p.m., but we wanted our ice cream. My mom came outside and we ordered. The guy was quiet, but said that he had stopped because he heard voices. No one was outside and we were inside when we were talking. There was an open garage door a few houses down, but no one was there. He was able to find the flavor that I asked for, but had some trouble finding the one that my mom wanted. I just saw it. I just ate one. I figured that he was new to the job and just nervous, so I thought nothing of it. We paid and we went back inside. Once we got inside, however, I noticed that mine was open. I asked my mom if she had opened it, as she is the one who had both of the treats. She said no. She offered me her ice cream bar, as we both knew neither of us wanted to eat an opened ice cream bar, when she noticed that hers was really puffed up, as if it had been blown up with air. We threw both of them away. After thinking about it for a few minutes, it all seemed so weird. 9 p.m. The music suddenly turned on when we both heard it. It didn't slowly fade in as if it had been on the whole time. It slowed to a stop in front of our house, before I even opened the door. He was quiet and gave us 2 suspicious ice cream bars. He sped away after that, not stopping for anyone else. Just 15-ish minutes ago, I called my mom in front of a garage to tell her that the cats were trying to catch this bug that looked like a wasp or something. As she came in, she saw something through the kitchen window. She rushed me to the front door in the next room, and when she opened it, a different car drove away. I didn't see the full thing, but she says that it was pulled over with the lights on, and quickly peeled out of there when we had opened the door. My dad just came home, and we told him about everything. He thinks it's odd, but that's about it. Sure, the 2 incidents could be 2 totally innocent, coincidental occurrences, but it's too weird. My mom wants me to sleep in the living room on the other couch tonight, just in case something happens, and I have no objections because I'm nervous as hell. The creepy people that we saw tonight, let's not meet again. This happened almost 2 decades ago, when I was around 5 years old. Like most kids, I always looked forward to the familiar song of the ice cream man's truck when it was passing down my street. My parents would take me outside and let me pick whatever ice cream I wanted. Since I am an only child, they never let me go out alone, even though we were in a fairly safe neighborhood. Anyway, on to the actual story. It was summertime, and the ice cream man would come around somewhat regularly since there were a few families with children in the area. After getting my ice cream one day, the visits from one specific ice cream man became more and more frequent until he was in my neighborhood literally every single day. My mom has an insanely strong intuition, and she quickly picked up on the fact that something was a little off about this guy. She explained to me that it just wasn't quite right for him to be in the neighborhood every day, and that I would no longer be able to get ice cream from him. 5-year-old me was not pleased with this. However, there wasn't much I could do considering I was just a kid. A few days passed without any interaction with the ice cream man, even though he was still passing up and down my street. One day, however, he decided to come up to my door and ask for me specifically by name. My mom was the one who answered since my dad was at work. She was cool and collected at first, but started to really get her back up when the guy refused to leave her front door. I was in the other room, but I could hear him saying things like, "Come on, I brought a gift just for her. Just let me talk to her and give them to her." I never really heard my mom raise her voice at anyone, but she went full-blown mama bear on this guy. She told him to get lost before she called the police, and my father told him to steer clear of our property. At the time, I didn't understand just how creepy it was for someone I didn't even know, who was at least 15 years older than me, to be bringing me gifts and basically begging to see me. Ice cream man, let's not meet. Growing up, I lived in a decent-sized middle-class apartment complex. This took place 1988 to 1990. I was about 4 or 5 when it happened. Since there was only one driveway in and out of our complex, my mom pretty much let me roam around by myself from a very young age. My quarter block of apartments was the first one you passed entering the complex, and my apartment was about 100 feet from it. I wasn't supposed to leave the court unless my mom knew whose place I was going to. I was a very curious and precocious child, and very social. My mom called me the mayor because I knew who a good number of people in the complex were. I had overall had a few run-ins with creeps, weirdos, and a definite pedo, or 2 over the years living there, but nothing that ever escalated into any sort of worrisome incident. My parents were both pretty tough growing up, and educated me early on street smarts and self-defense, and that it's okay to talk to strangers in certain situations because not everyone is bad, and how to tell when someone might be a danger to me. We had at one point a particularly ugly, creepy ice cream man. He had a Billy Ray Cyrus type spiky mullet. He always wore tank tops and had really bad acne. He also had really weird teeth and a piggish nose. At the time, I considered him in his 40s, but looking back on it, he was probably in his late teens, maybe early 20s. He loved talking to the other kids about wrestling. I went to his truck once along with friends when he was parked outside of the pool. I didn't have enough money for something, so I said, "Oh, never mind." But he gave it to me anyway for whatever money I did have. But I didn't like the way that he was way too friendly while smiling at me. So, if I heard the ice cream man, I would peek out of the window to see which ice cream guy was pulling into the complex. And if it wasn't him, I would get ice cream. I don't know how much time had passed between my first encounter with him and the last. But in between there were a few occasions where I was coming home or going to a different court, for whatever reason. And if I happened to be walking down the main drive, he would pull up next to me on the sidewalk, and I would just pretend that he wasn't there, and I would cut through a court and hide. He would holler things like, "Why are you so scared of me? I'm nice. You make me feel bad." One day, my mom said that I couldn't leave the court for whatever reason. My friend lived in the corner apartment of the court after mine, so I sat in my court's corner nearest hers. She sat in her corner. We were talking and tossing toys to each other across the parking lot. I heard the ice cream man. Even though I was at the other end of the block, he saw me when he pulled in. He started driving towards me, and I just ran and hid in my court until he moved further into the complex. I waited what felt like enough time, and I didn't hear music anymore. I walked back to the corner and my friend had already gone inside. I picked up whatever toy that I had left behind, and as I turned to start walking home, I noticed that he's sitting in the parking lot of the court across the main drive, in his truck with the music off. I drop what I was holding. I go to pick it back up, and he's already directly across the street from me, stopped. "Hey, what's your name? Can we be friends? I feel bad that I scared you. I'm a really nice guy." He had on a tie-dye tank top, and his hair was really greasy and his acne was very flared up. I remember just being so repulsed by him. My legs locked up because I was so scared, and mentally I was trying to decide if I would have a better chance escaping through the woods or to chance it down the main drive. "I can't have friends. My mom said so." "Well, let me give you a free ice cream. I feel bad." "My mom says I can't have ice cream." "Okay, you can have candy or soda or a snap bracelet." "Sorry, I can't cross the street." "Oh, that's okay, I'll come to you. You can ride in the truck and play the music if you want." I realized this back and forth was going to be a losing battle for me, so I decided the best thing to do was play along. "Okay, if you turn the truck around, I don't have to cross the street so my mom won't get mad." You would have to leave and immediately re-enter the complex to do that, but it would buy me 20 to 30 seconds. He got way too excited that I seemed willing, and he started to drive. I took off running. I got home and my mom was on the phone with my dad, who was out of the state for the day. I told her what happened, and she made me tell my dad, and they both told me how proud of me they were, and how I made some really grown-up decisions. After that, unless I was out of town, I avoided ice cream men at all costs. I still think about that to this day, and always tell that story to kids that I babysit. I just hope I was the only kid he tried to bait, and that no one else had an experience with him, which was worse. When I was 5, my grandfather died. I watched him die. I held his hand as he died. His battle with cancer was a hard one for me to cope with, and the nightmares afterwards were suitably intense. However, none would surpass the dreams that I've started to have a week after his passing. A week later, I had my first of what seems like hundreds of dreams of the character I dubbed the Green Man. In the dream, a man on a yellow hood with green warty skin told me that my house wasn't safe and that I needed to follow him. He emerged from my clothing rack in my closet, and he didn't seem to walk with his legs. Rather, he floated across the ground at a walking pace. In fact, I'm not sure this Green Man even had legs. His cloak drooped so low where legs would exist on a normal human, so who knows? In this dream, I got out of bed and followed the Green Man to the side yard of my grandma's house, where he told me that I needed to cross if I wanted to be safe. He gestured at the road in front of me, but instead of a road, it was a purple, flowing river filled with large fish. The water rushed very powerfully and the fish seemed malicious. I was so scared that I wanted to cry. I couldn't cross. Ultimately, the Green Man left me as he crossed the purple water. I woke up as soon as he disappeared. I was standing on the edge of the road, ready to step off the curb. Every time after this first dream, he would lead me to a different place so I could escape my house, and every time, I was blocked by a barrier and woke up in the real world analog of that place. I've woken up in my grandma's shed, in her bathroom, in my neighbor's yard, etc. And every time, there was some sort of physical barrier stopping me. One time, it was skeletons hanging from trees. Another, it was flaming grass, and so on. Every time, there was a dire reason for me to escape, but I never could. I stopped having these dreams when I turned 11. I'm now 24 and I haven't thought about the Green Man since. The memory of this guy was buried so deep that I literally forgot the hundreds of times that I sleptwalked into random places and almost got myself hurt. However, my grandmother called me and asked me if I had remembered my sleepwalking as a kid. Evidently, my brother is also sleepwalking and doing really weird stuff in his sleep. No mention of the Green Man, however. Last night, I had a dream where the Green Man crawled up from under my bed and told me that my grandmother was going to die if I didn't go help her. He led me down my stairs and out my front door, where again the road was a purple stream and I immediately knew I was dreaming. In my dream, I had stepped out of my front door and onto my porch. I had my keys in my hand and a cigarette in my mouth. I woke up on my front porch, ready to light a cigarette. I'm scared that I'll see him again. What causes this? My therapist said that he is the manifestation of my grief and abuse as a kid, but that doesn't explain why I sleepwalk, or why he tells me cryotic things. I'm getting really freaked out and I'm scared one time I won't wake up and I will end up getting hurt. More importantly, I'm worried for my brother and his safety. What if his dream world doesn't have barriers like mine did? He's 16 and he has access to a car. I'm super concerned that he was going to get seriously hurt or worse, and I'm not entirely sure how to stop it. I'm even scared to mention the Green Man to him, because if he also says he has dreams of a Green Man, then I'm not sure my psyche can handle it. It would confirm some sort of supernatural reality that I really want to deny. If he doesn't have the Green Man dream, then I can continue to believe this is some weird, psychological damage caused by witnessing death at such a young age. Since people are going to ask, I'm going to go ahead and describe this figure to the best of my ability. He stands about 6 feet tall, wears a bright yellow cloak with a hood that covers the top of his head right down to his eyes. His eyebrows seem to be made of some sort of algae or moss, and his skin is covered in warts. He is a deep forest green with coal black eyes and a scar on his left cheek that is bright red, and seems to leak a purplish fluid that he often wipes away as he speaks. His voice is like a combination of Darth Vader and Orlando Bloom as Legolas, in that it is deep and grating but also sing-songy and welcoming. He doesn't seem to walk but rather float about 6 inches off the ground, artificially increasing his height. He doesn't have any symbols on him that I can discern, just that mustard yellow cloak and his oozing scar. I can't tell if he is malicious, but he has full control over me in my dream state, as if I'm under a spell, until I encounter an obstacle in the dream world. I wish I knew what this was. I'll reply if he returns tonight. I recently made a post about reoccurring nightmares I had about a green man that I've had since I was about 8. To summarize, the green man would always tell me in dreams to go into the road or into my neighbor's shed, and I would sleepwalk towards those areas only to wake up. I also mentioned my brother has been sleepwalking lately, but found out that it wasn't related to the green man, and I've kind of let my guard down on that. This brings us up to 3 days ago when I first saw her. I was lying in bed with my partner, and from the upper corner of the bedroom, I could see movement. I sat up and a whole person was in the corner of the room looking into my eyes. I immediately thought I knew I was asleep, because during my green man dreams I had the same experience of a person materializing in my room and looking at me. Also in line with the green man, I couldn't scream or make any other noises, let alone move. I was frozen in a trance-like state, which is something I've grown used to over the last 16 years of my life. The woman remained silent the whole time and walked from the far corner of my bedroom to next to the door and gestured for me to follow, and so I did, very much against my will. I got up and I walked down the stairs into my living room, where she proceeded to step into the wall and disappear. After she disappeared into the wall, I must have fallen asleep because I was having standard dreams about work and my family, until she appeared again and I was now in my kitchen, with her gesturing to my back door. As I went to open the back door, she vanished into the walls again, and I was back to a normal dream. I woke up an unknown amount of time later, sitting in my living room thinking to myself, what a creepy nightmare. I need to take my sleep meds so I don't keep sleepwalking. And I lit a cigarette with my Zippo lighter. As I was going to close my lighter, she flew out from the wall at me and blew out the flame, and then flew through me and disappeared. I was 100% conscious at that time. I roll my own cigarettes, and if I had been sleepwalking, I would have not been able to get into the correct amount of tobacco and fill the paper to then roll and lick. Also, my Zippo was open with the flame freshly out, and the wick was still smoldering. Every night since, she has appeared in my dreams but not spoken. I've been taking heavy sedatives so I don't sleepwalk, and as an extra precaution, my partner and I switched the sides of the bed that we were on, so that she would wake up if I ever got out of bed. I'm scared now that I managed to get possessed or that I'm haunted. How can I be sure? So, for the past 6 months or so, I've been feeling a certain presence around me. It's nothing scary and I haven't actually seen them. Basically what happens is that I'll see something or someone in my peripheral vision, then nothing is there when I turn to look. Sometimes I see it when I'm walking down the street. Sometimes I see it in my rearview mirror when I'm driving in my car. But I can never look dead at it. Back in November 2019, I was almost in a really bad car wreck. Someone traveling in the opposite direction of my car had fallen asleep at the wheel, and they had swerved into my lane. They almost hit me head on while I was going around 65 miles an hour. At the last minute, I jerked the wheel and I ended up on the side of the road, with no scratches at all in my person or vehicle. After it had happened, I had a panic attack and realized just how crazy that was. I know I should have been hit. I know that something should have happened. This car got so close to mine and we both somehow just missed one another. When I was having my little panic attack, I could feel someone with me in the car. I could just feel deep down that someone or something intervened and basically had saved my life. Last week, I read a post about someone who asked their ghost to give them a sign, a blue car, and so I did the same thing. I spoke out loud and said, "Hey, I don't know if I'm being paranoid or if someone is actually here with me right now, but please give me a sign so that I know that someone is here." The sign was for me to see an orange Corvette, favorite color and car, within the next 24 hours. And what do you know? I saw two before the 24 hours was up. Those cars are not very popular where I live, so it was really strange to see two in one day, let alone both of them being orange. I guess my advice that I'm seeking would be, what's next? I have no idea who this person could be. Why are they following me around? Why are they protecting me from crazy accidents in everyday life? Ever since I saw the Corvettes, I've been feeling the presence grow stronger, like it's there more often now or something. I'm new to this whole thing, so has anybody else experienced anything like this? What did you do? What do you think? Let me know. So I don't really know how to explain this, or if it even fits on this sub, or even what actually happened if I'm being honest. But regardless, I'll try to relay this story. I was driving to work yesterday morning and I'm coming up a side street that connects to a very busy road in my area. It's the main road that stretches through like 20 towns. I get to the red light at this main road and sit there for about 15 seconds before seeing a car pull up behind me. As the car comes to a complete stop behind me, my eyes drift from the rearview mirror to the stoplight in front of me. It was red still. I then look down at my radio clock and it says 7:36. And this is going to sound strange, but for a period of time, that seemed to stretch on until infinity. I kind of felt like this intense pressure was all around me, like I was zoned out and I couldn't clear my head or move my body because I was obsessed with the numbers that I was seeing. Like I was in a trance or something and it wasn't silent around me, but it was at the same time. Like very, very loud, pressing silence. I couldn't move, but I also wasn't trying to move. Almost like I was paralyzed with fear, and I knew I was frozen, but couldn't really process it or try to move. I don't know. I really can't explain it. Even now, it's so confusing to me. After who knows how long of being stuck in this trance, suddenly everything snaps back to normal. Instantly. The very first thing I register is that the person behind me is laying on their horn. I look up and I see the light is green. I begin to drive forward, feeling completely 100% normal again. And once I get into the middle of the intersection, I sense this large presence to the left of me. I turn my head to look out my driver's side window just in time to see a huge truck coming right at me. It hits me, and I could feel my body break. I felt and heard so many of my bones get absolutely crushed. Suddenly, I'm upside down in my car, in so much pain that I can hardly breathe, covered in glass, and I can hear someone screaming. The last thing I remember before I passed out about 10 seconds later was seeing cop lights and distinctly thinking to myself, wow, how did they get here so fast? This is important. The next thing I remember, I open my eyes and I'm sitting in my car at the red light. The intense pain that I felt a moment ago is fading fast, but it's still there. Almost like a ghost version of itself, if that makes sense. I'm intensely confused at this point, and I start looking around in a panicky way, and my eyes trail across the clock again. It says 7:36, and I'm just beyond confused. I know it wasn't a daydream. It was so real. I'm frozen in place staring at the clock trying to figure out what the heck just happened. After about 5 or 10 seconds, I hear the person behind me start to beep at me, but I'm shaking and I'm about to cry, and so overwhelmed with leftover fear that I can't even react to it. They start to lay on their horn and I still can't move because I'm just so confused and frightened. Now at this point, I was starting to calm myself down and try to rationalize what happened. I was beginning to convince myself that it had to have just been a daydream. It was early enough and I was tired enough that I even started to think I just nodded off at the red light and I had dreamed the crash. What the hell else could have happened, right? If it weren't for what happened next, I probably would have been able to go the rest of my life believing that I had fallen asleep and dreamed it. The moment the clock turned 7:37, like the very second the numbers changed, a huge truck comes barreling through the light, definitely speeding. They ran their red light and crossed right in front of my car. A few seconds later, a cop, who must have just been driving behind the truck in the first place, runs the red light as well, turning on his lights in the process and beginning to pursue the speeding truck. They both drove out of my view within a few seconds. I was so shaken I just pulled my car to the side of the road, right where I was, and sat there in silence, for I don't even know how long. Like, what normal explanation could I possibly come up with for this? There isn't one. I hadn't seen the truck or the cop car before they ran the lights in front of me. So how did the dream crash that I had include those very specific and very real details? The entire area that I live in is covered in trees, so it's not like I can see very far down the road in either direction. I know for a fact I did not see the truck or the cop car before I experienced the crash. I'm still so shaken. How do I rationalize this experience to myself? I feel disillusioned by something, but I don't even know what. I feel like I'm going crazy. I needed to share this with people who won't automatically dismiss this as a hallucination or a dream. Hi everyone, this is my first time posting and I want to give a brief description of my background and then delve into what happened. I consider myself to be a Christian. However, I'm not Christian in the sense of I don't go to church every Sunday, and I don't believe the Bible is 100% true. I know it was a written book by man and edited by man. I do believe the Bible has a place in my belief. I believe it holds wisdom and knowledge important to my faith. I believe in Jesus and God. I also believe there is more out there. I believe there is good and I believe there is evil. And I think I am empathetic to a degree. I'm learning that how I feel and how I react to the world around me is different than some people, and that there are ways to help with this. I know I could go on for a long time, but that's a brief history. Anyway, so my anxiety has been through the roof. I can't sleep well, and when I do, my dreams are so vivid. And I've had a couple of dreams that directly relate to something going on in someone else's lives that I have no clue of until I dreamt it and reached out to them. It's starting to scare me. And so I decided to try something to cleanse myself. I'm new to this, so please, don't judge or bash me. So here's my experience. I went outside. There's a storm moving in. The wind is blowing and there's lightning to my north, with the occasional rumble of thunder. I feel silly, but I light my white candle, which I would like to know did not stay lit for more than a minute because of the wind, but I figure it's the idea of it, right? So I lit my candle and I made my salt circle. When I closed the circle, I could feel a snap. It felt like the world was lifted off my shoulders and I could breathe. I could think. I closed my eyes and I began to pray. I prayed for strength and healing. I prayed for the cleansing of my soul and my energy. I prayed for protection on my family and myself. I prayed for wisdom. I prayed for strength and wisdom to cleanse my home, to protect it, to help me be a beacon of light to my family, to fill our home with love and laughter, to feel the presence of the Lord when someone walks in. I prayed for God to give me energy from the earth to cleanse my home and my spirit and my family. At this point, I hear something moving on the ground. I looked down and I thought it was one of our cats for a moment, and I couldn't get my brain to work because it was too big to be our cats and none of our cats are allowed outside. I then realized it was a possum. It turned and looked at me, came to the circle, stayed there for a moment, and then walked away. I thought it was odd, but I continued my prayer. It wasn't until I came in the house and relayed my experience to my husband that he pointed out that he thinks the opossum was a manifestation of my prayers, my spirit animal. But this is all brand new to me. Was it just a fluke, or could it have been something more? This took place almost exactly 8 years ago when I was 21 and a senior in college. I went to school in Boston and lived off campus in an apartment in a neighborhood full of college kids. For those of you who also went to school in Boston, I'm sure you know which neighborhood I'm referring to. I lived in an apartment with 3 other roommates. That was an old house that was split up into separate units, with 3 units in total, 1 on each floor. Our place was on the top floor, which I'm sure used to be an attic, since it had slanted walls in each room. Like many old houses in Boston, this one had 2 staircases, one main one in the front and a sort of service staircase in the back that had access to each unit and the back porch. The other 2 apartments had real doors to the back stairwell with deadbolts, but our door, which was in my roommate's bedroom, and worked out perfectly because he would go outside to smoke, had kind of a tiny hobbit door. It also worked out perfectly because he was short, and had only a latch lock and nothing else. Not the best security, to say the least. It was Christmas break and I was returning from an 8 to 10 hour drive away with my cat in tow, who wouldn't stop meowing for the whole ride. About a week before all of my roommates, because I had to be back at work before classes started. Our neighbors in the other apartments were also all students who had went home for the holidays, and basically the entire neighborhood itself was empty for the same reason. As I arrived at probably 1 or 2 a.m., happy that I was finally home and didn't have to listen to incessant meowing. Have you ever tried to plead with a cat for your sanity? It doesn't work. I had a weird feeling and noticed a draft coming from my roommate's room. Turns out the hobbit door was busted wide open. Since we were all dumb college kids at the time and didn't have concern for our own safety, I assumed he just went out to smoke before leaving and forgot to shut the door behind him. I continued on to my room and let the kitty out, and noticed that my jewelry box was open, and then that every drawer in my dresser was open, and every drawer in the plastic drawers in my closet were open. I checked the jewelry box, and although I didn't own anything of value, nothing was taken. I go and check out my roommate's rooms, and it's the same thing. Every drawer, box, and closet open, but from what I can tell, their contents remained untouched. The kitchen drawers with the silverware were left wide open too. Needless to say, I was pretty shaken and freaked out, since when you're that age you tend to think that nothing like that will happen to you, even if you live in the city. But from what I could tell, nothing had been taken from the apartment. Our TV was there, and my roommate's desktop. We all had our laptops while we were away. Sadly, we didn't really have much of value. A burglar broke into our house and decided we must have not had anything good to steal. I called the police and they filed a report. Of course, thinking the whole thing was funny and making a joke about it. Maybe they stole a fork from the silverware drawer because they were really hungry. Great dad joke. It turns out that after our first floor neighbors returned, they said they had noticed that the window off the front porch was left cracked open and unlocked, and their door leading to the back stairwell was open from the inside. So whoever it was went up to the 3rd floor and easily kicked good old hobbit door open, and had fun looking at all of our crappy stuff. The best part that we learned from our neighbors is that before they left a brand new DVD of Gone with the Wind that one of them had received as a Christmas gift on the coffee table. They were 100% sure that it was not opened before they left, and they all left together since they were from the same hometown. The DVD had been opened and was in the DVD player, and they noticed that their couch cushions and pillows looked like somebody had been laying down. So to whoever broke into my apartment, decided that there was nothing good to steal, and then proceeded to kick back and watch an almost 4-hour cinematic masterpiece. Let's not meet. This happened some hours ago. To give you a bit of context, I'm a male in my early 20s, and I live in an apartment on the second floor. I come back home from a New Year's Eve party around 6 a.m. I undress myself, text a couple of people, and then go to bed. All of this in a span of about 10 to 15 minutes. And then basically, as soon as I get into bed, I hear my doorbell ring. And not my actual door, but the gate to the apartment complex. Initially, I say forget it. It must be some drunk person or someone pulling a prank or being a dick. But then the guy keeps ringing very insistently. So I go on my boxers to answer the phone that is wired to the gate. I answer the phone and I hear a foreign-sounding guy that is trying to tell me something about a friend and keys and to let him in the complex. I think about it for a second and then I tell him, I don't really know you, so I'm not going to open the gate. I hang up and I go to bed again. They keep ringing very insistently, so I get up again and I go answer the phone, this time a bit angry. And I am greeted by a girl speaking perfect English. I live in Italy, and telling me in a very clear way that she is staying on the 5th floor, and her friend has the keys. That she is a woman alone in the street and to come check it at the door if I don't believe her. She sounded very convincing, to be honest. Mind you, in this moment, I'm drunk, high and very tired, trying to weigh my options. What if she really is a girl alone on the street at 6 a.m., in the cold with all the drunk people going around? What if she isn't, though? Fortunately, even in my intoxicated state, I have the idea to go out on the balcony over the gate and check out who is in the street. I throw on my parka because it's pretty cold, and in my boxers, I go out on the balcony to have an absolute forget you moment. There were 4 seedy-looking people, 2 male, 2 female if I saw correctly, right in front of the gate, talking quietly between themselves. And I yell at them. I shouldn't have done it. Oi, you want to come in? And immediately go inside to call the police and grab a knife. Yeah. The real scary thing is that my gate is not see-through. So if I went down, I wouldn't have seen outside, and as soon as I had opened the door, I would have been overpowered by them, and probably forced to let them in my apartment. This story pretty much ends there. Those people kept ringing the bell aggressively for another 15 minutes, while I took off the lights and went around my house like a drunken Rambo with a knife in my hand, checking periodically all the windows. I have windows on the internal courtyard and windows on the street, which they easily could have climbed, or so I thought. And then it all ended. I don't even know if the police saw anyone or came at all because I never heard from them, and I just went to bed after a solid hour of this. It was Christmas time. My wife and I were staying at her childhood home where her mother now lived all alone. Well, not if you include the cats. Meow. The house was on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs. If you're picturing freshly mowed lawns, American flags, and empty sidewalks, you're picturing it right. It's a single-story home with an attached garage out front. The garage has 2 doorways apart from the electric garage door, of course. One leads to the garden and backyard. This has an old doggy door from their days with dear old Max, R.I.P. Max, that they had covered with a piece of nailed-in wood. That had always made me slightly uncomfortable before, but I figured it had been that way for years, so what's the worst that could happen? The second door leads to the kitchen. Hollow core. It could stop a mouse, not much else. Definitely not something that I wanted in, or someone. We were asleep in my wife's childhood bedroom at the front of the house. 3 a.m. I was in that deep, dark recess of sleep. You know, you're in the diving bell, and you're submerged hundreds of meters below the surface in black water, protected from the real world by miles of nothingness. And then I heard it. The scream. "What are you doing?" It was my mother-in-law's voice echoing down the hallway. To me, lost in a sea of sleep, it sounded like a jet engine roaring past my eardrum. I bolted up. What happened next happened in a matter of seconds. But about that scream, even though I was dead asleep, I heard enough of it to make sense of the urgency behind it. This wasn't an, "Oh, you scared me" type of scream. This was different, and I knew it. Not consciously, but my lizard brain, that piece we retained from our primitive ancestors, knew something was wrong. I watch and read a fair amount of true crime, and this scream awakened that horrible fear. The one that says, "This can't really be happening to me, can it?" Honestly, in that second of the night, it sounded like someone was about to be murdered. You ever wonder if you're a fight or flight type of individual? I always have, and I came to know something about myself after this night. I'm a fighter. I leaped out of bed, growled, yes, growled in the manliest voice that I could muster, "I'm gonna kill you," and took off running. I tore open the bedroom door and ran into the hallway. There, at the end, I saw my mother-in-law, nightgown on, look of utter shock on her face, standing still. We make eye contact as I continue towards her, and then she turns her head, looks directly into the kitchen. I hurry past her and round the corner into the kitchen. The hollow core door is obliterated, shards everywhere. I look through the open frame and see the electric garage door is open. I push ahead. As I run into the garage, I hear it. The sound of someone hopping into a car just out of view. Just as I make it onto the driveway, I see a car peeling out from the sidewalk adjacent to the house. But the adrenaline is still pumping. And who am I to say no to adrenaline? So, like an idiot, I run barefoot after the car. I give a good go, but I'm no Michael Johnson, and even he couldn't catch a speeding car. It soon vanishes down the street and I'm left all alone. The police showed up within 3 minutes, which, I have to say, make me feel a lot more at ease with my mother-in-law living there. They took our statements. My mother-in-law said that she had heard a noise, the hollow core door being kicked in, and walked into the kitchen where she had encountered the burglar, a small framed woman. The police theorized that she was working as part of a team. Her job was to squeeze through the doggy door, kick in the hollow core, and open the electric garage door for her accomplice. According to the police, the burglars most likely thought nobody was home. Fortunately, my mother-in-law must have caught her off guard and scared her, in addition to my manly growl, of course. But it feels good to know that everyone was saved, and to learn that I guess I've got a little fight in me. And for the record, we bought the heaviest goddamn wooden door you would ever see to replace that hollow core. I would like to see a mouse try to get through that. This happened back while I was in college a couple years ago. Me and my roommates moved into a beautiful apartment our junior year of college. Our parents made it extremely clear that two small females living alone together was not ideal for some of the cheaper, shady neighborhoods close to our college. We attended a college in our state capital, so we were in a city environment, and had certain criteria we had to meet in order for us to live there, and for them to co-sign our leases as well. Lit sidewalks, keyed entry into the apartment building, a lit parking lot, X amount of blocks from campus, and so on. So we finally found one that fit our parents' criteria. Our apartment building had a keyed entry for both of the front of the building and the back gate that led to the fire escape. Our apartment was an end unit that led to the fire escape, so there was 2 deadbolt locks on it. We loved our apartment. We felt safe, we had fun, truly living the college experience. And then my roommate's boyfriend starts slowly moving his things into the apartment and staying there way more often than he should. I finally tell my roommate that if he wants to use the water, electric, and food that I help pay for, then he needs to pay for it too, including our rent. I tell her a three-way split, or I'm paying only my rent and he can pay the entire electric, water, and trash bill. I think I'm being pretty fair, and even though her boyfriend doesn't have a job, that's not my problem. I work and go to college. I don't want to work at McDonald's. Yes, he actually said that. Excuse is completely garbage. If you want a place to stay, then to the Golden Arches you shall go, buddy. So instead, my roommate starts sneaking him in really late at night after I go to sleep, and he leaves on days that I'm home. While I'm in class, he's there, and then leaves before I come back. My schedule is extremely routine. Well, he can't have a key, so if my roommate is in class or at work, how is he getting in? He can't take my roommate's key because if he decides to leave halfway through the day, how will she get her key back? All good questions. The solution they had come up with is to leave the back door unlocked that leads to the fire escape, and then he can just jump the fence at the bottom of the fire escape to get back on the fire escape when he's ready to come back. Or stick a rock in between the door, whatever works for him. So I'm off of work and school one Thursday morning and decide I'm going to sleep in as long as I possibly can. My roommate and her boyfriend have already left for the day, so naturally they leave the door unlocked. I'm asleep like a pretty princess. It's about 10 in the morning when I hear the back door open to the apartment. I come to just enough to recognize the noise, realize it's my roommate or her boyfriend, and I brush it off and go try to drift back off. All of a sudden, I start hearing some creep through the apartment, wooden floors. It definitely doesn't sound like casual walking. It is clearly someone stepping slowly and quietly through the apartment. My door to my room is ajar just a sliver, but I don't see anything out of the door, and I'm honestly too tired to get up and look. A couple of minutes pass and I figure that my roommate and or her boyfriend are just being weirdos and I fall back asleep. I can't be sure how much time passes before I open my eyes, but it can't be too long. I wake up to my door opening. My back is to the door and I'm facing the opposing wall. I slowly start to turn over to see why my roommate or her boyfriend would dare wake me up from my slumber. And there he is. A burglar, in my room, next to the bed I'm currently laying in. A 6-foot-tall, 250-pound minimum burglar, unplugging my TV, about 5 feet from where I currently am. I immediately pretend I'm just shifting positions in my sleep, and continue to roll over with my eyes as shut as I could make them seem, still open enough to watch what was really going on. He hears me shuffling as I turn over, stops, looks dead at me, and luckily doesn't realize that my eyes are open just a tiny bit. He goes back to unplugging my TV, my DVD player, shoves it in a bag he's brought, like those bags from IKEA, and steals my change jar, and casually starts walking out the front door to my apartment, like he came in for a freaking cup of tea or something. After I hear the door shut, I immediately sprint out of bed, grab my phone, start dialing 911, all the while locking the back and front doors. The dispatcher is trying to calm me down. At this point, I am hysterical. I can't even catch my breath to tell her okay. Luckily, I told her my address before I started hyperventilating. Pause. I will take a second to commend the police department, both city and college, because they were there in less than 3 minutes. Resume. She tells me the cops are there, but they need me to go downstairs to let them in the building, because they don't have a key to the front door of the building. I am so afraid to open the door to my apartment and even look down the hallway. I'm about to walk to the front door and extend my arm out to the handle when I hear, "Ma'am, it's the police." As if I didn't get scared enough already. They yell through the door. I am paranoid because the dispatcher just told me that they couldn't get in. and didn't realize someone probably let them in downstairs. I asked the dispatcher to confirm that the people at my door are actually police officers. She tells me that they are at my door. Okay, cool. I open the front door and I collapse right there. My legs completely turn to jello and I just hit the floor. I blacked out for a brief period of time, but they held me up and sit me down on the couch. There are at least 10 officers in my apartment from both the city and college departments. When I look outside the living room window to the street below, there are 5 or 6 cop cars blocking the street. I later found out that they were doing a perimeter search around the immediate area. I'm being bombarded with questions now. I have to try to find out what's missing besides the stuff from my room. I'm crying, I'm shaking. This is not at all how I saw my day off going. I tell them that my roommate left the back door open for her boyfriend, and they inspect the back door and blah blah. The next thing I know, my roommate and her boyfriend walk in, and they both have the most dumbfounded looks on both of their faces. At this point now, there is a detective talking to me, and I'm giving my statement, giving a description of the burglar, the stuff missing, looking at mugshots, etc. I immediately stop talking to the detective, look up at both of them, and blurt out, "Somebody robbed us while I was asleep. He came into my room." My roommate looks me dead in the face and says, "My God, is any of my stuff gone?" That's really what you're asking me right now. If your replaceable stuff is missing. 2 officers take her and her boyfriend aside and talk to them while I'm finishing up with the detective. I call my then boyfriend and he comes over to help me pack my stuff to stay over at his house for a couple of days, which turned into staying until my lease at my place had ended, around 4 months. After failing to recognize any suspects in a lineup, the cops slowly start leaving. After they all leave, I call my parents to tell them what has happened, gather my things and head over to my boyfriend's house. My roommate and her boyfriend never once apologized, not for leaving the door unlocked, but just a general, "I'm sorry this happened to you" type of apology. They never asked me if I was okay, if I wanted to talk, nothing. The day my lease ended was the best day of that entire year. I couldn't wait to get away from my roommate, her boyfriend, and that apartment. They never found the guy who robbed me that day. I didn't even care about the materialistic things. He robbed me of my safety and security, and it took a good amount of counseling to get that back. I'm also thankful he didn't try to attack me that morning. My friendship with my roommate was tarnished. I haven't spoken to her since. To this day, I don't sleep with my back to the door, and I always have a knife under my mattress. The summer after I graduated college, I moved home to live with my parents while looking for a fall internship. I was a 21-year-old woman at the time. My parents live in the suburbs, on a ridge that overlooks a more urban area, and our house is pushed back into the woods. I wouldn't call it secluded, but the driveway is long and you can't see the house from the street. We had no neighbors to the left, and neighbors a 3-minute walk to the right. I was home alone one afternoon while my parents were working and lounging around the house in shorts, a tank top, and no bra. My house is very cheery and full of natural light. It's the most non-threatening place to me. It's also set up rather oddly. Basement, ground, 1 level up. All the stairs are opened and all 3 floors are open to each other. A large portion of the ground level living room ceiling goes up 2 stories, with a bedroom on either side of the floor above ground. Each bedroom has a small glass window with shutters looking down into the ground floor living room. I heard the doorbell ring about 1 p.m. and I run upstairs, thinking it's UPS and my parents get packages often. I see a man on the other side of the glass door, and immediately feel uneasy. He's a large, tall, rotund man in a plain white t-shirt, and scraggly jeans with brownish stains all over his shirt. I open the door a crack and ask if I can help him. I'm here to fix the phones, he announces, and he pushes the door open, walking into the foyer. He stunk like BO and rotting something, maybe meat. His tone was extremely gruff, and from the get-go, he was demanding and acting rude, sizing me up as I folded my arms across my chest. Are you from CenturyLink? I asked. I found it weird he wasn't wearing some kind of company shirt. I glanced outside and I saw his truck. No logo, a rusted red beater. He just grunted. I need you to unplug every phone in your house, he barks. I was super weirded out. Why did he need my help if he was there to repair the phones? My parents hadn't mentioned anything wrong with the phones. I was uncomfortable unplugging the phones, especially since somewhere in the dark basement. I was not going down there while this man was in our house. I don't know anything about our phones. It would be best if you did that, I said. He looked at me angrily, but made no move to work on the phones, even though I had indicated where in the house they were located. Well, where's your router? He asked. Router? My heart started to slam against my chest. I thought he was here to fix phones, not the internet. It's in the basement in the back room of the laundry room, I told him. It was the most isolated room in the house. My dad's tiny darkroom he used to develop photos. I don't know my way around this place, he snapped. Show me where it is. Now my dad works maybe 5 minutes from home and he always answers his phone. I whipped out my phone and I called my dad. I looked at the man and said, my dad will know what the main problem with the phones is. The guy looked extremely annoyed. As my dad's phone rang, I said, luckily he works just up the road and he should be coming home for lunch soon, so he can help us out. Reliable dad. He picked up on the second ring. Dad, hey, you're coming home for lunch, right? I asked. He knew something was up from my tone, but I kept talking. My dad never came home for lunch. There's a guy here who says he's here to work on the phones and he can't find the router. Can you talk to him about the problem? My dad said there wasn't anything wrong with the phones. He works with computers, so he got the hint about the weird router question. He told me to put the guy on the line. I quickly handed my cell phone to the man and said, talk to my dad, and turned and booked it up the stairs into one of the upper bedrooms. I locked the door. I didn't care about my phone. I heard the guy talking to my dad, talking about how he's checking all the lines in the area for storm damage. Yeah, we hadn't had any storms recently. I sat next to the small window that went from the bedroom into the open living room. My house is a foreign type of architecture and set up rather oddly. I saw the guy set my phone down and head for the door. He didn't have anything with him. No tools, no parts, nothing. I heard the truck pull out. After about 10 minutes, the garage door opened and I heard my dad frantically yelling my name. I ran downstairs and apologized for acting weird on the phone, and told him that the guy gave me the creeps, and that I had to get Dad on the phone to distract him. Dad was equally as freaked out and said the guy didn't make any sense. We never got a bill, and we called CenturyLink, and they told us that they hadn't sent anyone to our house. This occurred when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and is a story that I only just recently remembered. It was summertime and my mom was having a garage sale on our driveway. Her, me, and my brother, who was aged about 4 or 5 at the time, and my grandmother, my mom's mom, were all seated inside of the garage during the sale. Me and my brother, of course, had been playing a bit though, running from our yard and then back to our driveway and such. We had a few visitors, but it was one woman who was responsible for this story. She was older, about 70 or something, and walked with a limp. I remembered this because she had a cane. She was on foot and was carrying nothing but a small red toolbox. Not a lunchbox, a literal metal toolbox. She carried things inside of it that you could hear clanging around. My dad had one just like it when I was a kid, that I wasn't allowed to touch because he was a plumber and didn't want me or my brother near his expensive tool sets. So I found it strange that she was just walking around with it. She didn't greet us, she just started picking things up and looking at them. My mom decided to initiate conversation, and this is how it went. "Hey, good morning. Do you have anything for free?" My mom was a bit confused. "Excuse me?" She picked up an item, asking, "I can have this for free." No, sorry. Everything has a sticker on it with a price." "Why is it not free?" "It's a garage sale." "I'm trying to sell things, sorry." It was at this point that the lady went quiet, and my mom just stood up, staring at her. My grandma called me and my brother to sit behind her, and we watched and waited for something else to happen. The woman set her toolbox down on one of our tables and opened it up to reveal a bunch of random things. Little trinkets, loose change, actual tools. She had everything from Kleenex to quarters. It was weird. She motioned towards a small group of figurines my mom was selling and asked if she could have one for free. At this point, my mom was getting annoyed and wanted this lady to leave. She said so, and the woman started walking towards us. She said something about how cute me and my brother were as we sat ducking behind my grandma's chair. She started walking into our garage, and my mom told her to stop and repeated that she should leave. She said something else about me and my brother, and asked if we liked her trinkets while she stood staring at us. And my grandma chimed in that she would call the police if the woman didn't leave. She then slowly turned around and walked back to her toolbox, lifting up one of the figurines and very obviously putting it in her box without paying for it. My mom didn't fight her on it, just told her to leave now, and so she did. She wandered up and down our street, away from our driveway but within eyesight. We kept an eye on her for the rest of the day, as she roamed around our neighborhood and surrounding streets until she finally left. It was super weird, and us kids were advised not to leave our garage for the rest of the day. The story continues on to about a week later, when me and my brother were playing outside again. We have landscaping around our house, which are rocks that have flower planters and birdhouses, nothing too spectacular. And it wasn't unusual for me and my brother to climb and stand on the rocks as kids. We started walking around my house to do this, and then went inside to get a drink or something of sort. We weren't gone for more than a few minutes when we came back outside and returned to the exact spot that we had just been in. And I immediately noticed the woman's same bright red toolbox is sitting on top of one of the rocks on our landscape. I ran back inside with my brother and told my parents. My dad went outside to retrieve the toolbox, and it was the same one that the woman had, with her items still stored inside. I hadn't seen her since the garage left, and still never have. But somehow, she managed to leave that toolbox there without being noticed, which meant that she had to have been watching and waiting for the ideal time. At least that's what I believe. The creepiest part is that our yard is away from our garage. In order to get to that part of our landscaping, you would have to go up our driveway and literally walk across the entire length of our lawn and the front of our house, and then to the side in order to place it there, since we have thick hedges and things blocking the rest of our yard from the public. We have 2 big windows on the front, and the side of our house too that were open, which just creeps me out even more when I think that she could have been watching us from the outside. I don't remember what my parents did with the toolbox. I'm pretty sure they threw it away. None of us have ever seen that woman again. And no, there's no chance that we missed the toolbox the first time around. It was bright in color and was literally within our walking path. I noticed it as soon as I turned the corner of our yard. There was no missing it. I don't know what her intentions were, but I'm glad that we haven't encountered her since. This happened in my first year at uni in Australia. I was moving out of home for the first time, and I think this made me very, very naive in this situation. I found a cheap place in the city near my workplace, university at the time. $150 for a room in a share house only 20 minutes out from the CBD. It seemed like an awesome deal to me. I messaged the landlord and told her that I was interested. Before she gave me a time to come and inspect the place, she seemed overly interested in my ethnic background. I'm half Ethiopian, so I definitely don't look white. But when I told her I'm Australian, she suddenly became withdrawn. I thought it was strange, and maybe she thought I was lying because she had seen my profile on flatmates.com, so I explained my background. She seemed dissatisfied with my answer, and we organized a time for me to come see the room. I will call the landlord Denise. Denise showed me around and talked as if the place was already mine, which I thought was exciting. There was a main house with 5 bedrooms, a caravan on the side, and a granny flat behind it with 3 bedrooms, which is where I would be moving in. The main house and caravan were full, 7 people living there, but only one of the rooms in the granny flat was occupied. It was nice enough considering, and very clean. A weekly cleaner was included in the rent price, as well as weekly maintenance. I didn't think to ask what that meant because I was already pretty set on moving in. I met the people who would go on to be my housemates. All of them were foreigners, mostly Chinese or South Korean, who had come to study. I still didn't find this odd. I mean, there are plenty of international students here. The door to my room had a lock on it, and I was told only myself and Denise had a key. But Denise never usually came to the house, so there is a nice level of privacy. A week after I moved in, I met the maintenance guy. I'll call him Patrick. He seemed to be gardening and came over to introduce himself. Seemed nice enough. I found out that he's Denise's brother, and he looked to be in his late 40s or so. I found him to be a bit awkward, but I have been raised to be polite to the fault, so I ended up talking to him for a long time before going back to my room. I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember he kept saying things like I was very beautiful, and describing my skin as exotic and caramel more than once, which rubbed me the wrong way. A few days later, the cleaner comes also. She is super lovely and has known Denise and Patrick for a long time. She and I had a nice chat, and for some reason, she brought up that Patrick was on the autism spectrum. So to me, that explained his awkwardness, and I realized he was harmless. So I felt bad about my initial judgment of him. The next time I saw him, I came out into the kitchen and saw him standing there. This struck me as odd. 1, it was the morning, I was in my pajamas, having just woken up. 2, he's the maintenance guy. I didn't understand why he should be inside. But I still felt bad, so I just smiled and said hello. He turned and seemed startled, but explained to me he was just taking out the trash. I saw that he had replaced the bins in the kitchen, so I was just like, okay. He was trying to be nice, I guess. But I told him that he really didn't have to do that. He just kind of insisted, and I was like, alright, whatever. I ended up talking to him again. Again, he seemed to have a weird fixation with me being exotic, even though I had told him I was born in Australia. But mostly, he was just generally asking how I was finding the place, and he reiterated that everything was super safe, and for some reason, he brought up the keys to the bedrooms. He said only me, Denise, and he had keys. I didn't say anything out loud, but in my head I thought, wait, since when does he have a key? But I still kind of brushed it off. Cut to a few months later. I work about 4 to 6 days a week, casually, as well as going to uni for 4 days, so I'm rarely there during the day, and I lock my bedroom door before leaving every day. I don't remember exactly what time of year this would have been, but I know it was colder, and I hadn't used the ceiling fan in my room for a while. I got home and locked my bedroom door, and the ceiling fan was on. This struck me as odd immediately. I knew that I hadn't turned it on in forever. I was very, very confused and thought that I turned it on while leaving and just didn't remember. I brought it up with my roommate and she just kind of shrugged and said that's odd, but didn't seem weirded out by it, so I figured I was overthinking it. A few weeks later, I'm leaving for work and I have a very strange feeling while walking to the front gate of the house. For some reason, I turn around and I see Patrick hiding behind some bushes, staring at me. As soon as he is caught, he turns and pretends that he's gardening. In the moment, my mind actually went kind of blank. I was like, surely he wasn't watching me. All I did was frown and wonder to myself why he would stare at me like that, and then pretend that he hadn't been. I come back later in the day, unlock my door, walk in, and again, something is off. But this time, I can't put my finger on it. I stand in my room looking around, staring at everything in the room, but I can't find anything. When I realize that I don't know what I'm looking for, I feel creeped out and I leave my room, and tell my roommate again that I thought someone had been in my room. This time she sat down with me and basically said she thought someone went in her room recently too. We chatted and she said that she had left her bedroom window open when she went to work, and when she came home it was shut. I brought up the fan again, and my roommate said maybe we should let Denise know. So I texted Denise and said something along the lines of, I think someone's been going into my room because of X and X event, and my roommate said the same thing. I exchanged a few messages with Denise, but the general response from her was just, oh wow, that's so bizarre. Again, being super naive, young and too polite for my own good, I assumed that I was overreacting and didn't want to seem like a bad tenant. Thankfully, it turns out Denise was more sympathetic than I realized because she said she was going to have the locks changed the next day. I was like, yay, thanks, and assumed that would be it. But in my head I was thinking, only 3 people have keys, me, Denise, and Patrick, so if someone has been coming in, wouldn't it have been one of us 3? Which is why I didn't feel good when Patrick showed up the next day to change the lock himself, being the maintenance guy and all. I ended up leaving while he did the change. Got a text later saying it was done and the new keys were in my mailbox. Fast forward, I had now been at this place for nearly a year. By now, I was aware that Patrick seemed to come over about twice a week, and he always came inside the house to take out the rubbish, but never really seemed to do any maintenance work. I chalked it up to Denise giving him a job because maybe he couldn't find one elsewhere, and I tried to avoid him. As far as I remember, nothing seemed strange until now. I come home from work again and walk into my bedroom. While I'm getting my clothes to shower, I noticed something very, very strange that was definitely not there when I left. There was some whitish pale gunk kind of splattered upwards on the wall and floor. Honestly, my first thought when looking at that after a while was like, that looks like a donut glaze or something. I leaned closer to it, but still didn't really register what the stuff was, only that I definitely hadn't spilled anything there at all. So again, I got creeped, went to the kitchen to grab a Chucks and wipe it up, when I had thought like, wait, is that what I think it is? I really didn't know what to look for. But as soon as I had that thought, nothing could convince me otherwise. And again, my door had been locked, only myself, Denise, and Patrick had keys. My roommate wasn't home, but I called Denise right away. She didn't answer, so instead, I messaged her and said basically, someone had been in my room and there was some weird stuff splattered on the wall. I wanted to see if she came to the same conclusion that I did. Her response this time was really off. She messaged back hours later and was dismissive, said something like, very bizarre, the lock had been changed though. And I was like, yeah, obviously. So who do you think would have been in there? I felt so weird and grossed out that I went to a friend's place and messaged my stepdad about it. I told him everything for the first time, and I guess it sounds a lot worse all at once because his response was, hell no, you're moving out of there. I called Denise and told her I was going to move out if the issue wasn't taken seriously. And this is when I realized that the leasing situation at this place was dodgy, which I didn't know beforehand due to the lack of experience and no sense to ask. Essentially, there was no record of me actually being a tenant, and I was kind of just sending money into this lady's bank account, but there wasn't any official paperwork. I looked back over the stuff I had signed when I initially moved in, and it was typed up by Denise, I assume. I don't remember details, but it wasn't official at all. Super naive. So I was able to move out ASAP. Denise didn't put up a fuss about the short notice, and when I came back the next day, the stuff on the wall was gone, so I didn't have any proof of what had happened. But that just kind of confirmed to me that something weird was going on with Denise and Patrick. My stepdad helped me take all my stuff. I didn't have much. Denise just left a message and said, "Please leave the keys on the counter." It took me a few weeks to process every creepy thing that had happened throughout my stay, and to put it all together as a massive creep fest. My roommate left soon after. Months later, she messaged me to say one of the old housemates told her police were called to the place. I don't know why or what happened, but I suspect it wasn't for the tenants.